Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. I'm not one for dramatic introductions, so I'll just say it like it is. I'm Royce Danforth, a small-town cop in the sleepy town of Reading, Vermont. I've been working here for over 15 years, and nothing much happens that's out of the ordinary. We've got the occasional bar fight, some petty thefts, and every now and then a missing cat that turns up a few days later. It's a quiet place, and I like it that way, or at least I used to. It was 2003 when things took a turn. The call came in around 10 p.m. on a chilly October night, just as I was wrapping up my shift. Margaret Ellis, the town librarian, reported hearing strange noises coming from the woods behind her house. Margaret's a tough old bird, not prone to flights of fancy, so when she calls about something strange, you listen. I got in the cruiser and headed over. The streets were dark and a fine mist had settled over the town, blurring the edges of everything. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The town seemed too quiet, even for Reading. Margaret's house was one of those old colonial-style homes, the kind you see on postcards, with a big front porch and tall, narrow windows. She was waiting for me on the porch, her face pale and drawn. "Royce, thank God you're here," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what it is, but there's something out there. It's been making this awful noise like nothing I've ever heard before." I nodded, trying to keep things calm. "I'll take a look, Margaret. You just stay inside and lock the doors, all right?" She nodded and hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. I made my way around the side of the house and towards the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted and gnarled like the fingers of some ancient, malevolent creature. The further I went, the thicker the mist became, until it was almost like walking through a cloud. And then I heard it. The sound made my blood run cold. It wasn't an animal, at least not any animal I'd ever heard. It was a low, almost metallic grinding noise, like something being dragged across stone. It was coming from deeper in the woods, and I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I unholstered my gun, more out of habit than anything else, and continued forward. The undergrowth was thick, and I nearly tripped over a root sticking up from the earth. The noise grew louder as I approached, a sickening grating sound that made my teeth ache. I could feel the air around me growing colder, and the mist thickened to the point where I could barely see a few feet in front of me. And then, through the fog, I saw it. A figure, hunched over and massive, its back to me. It was tearing into something on the ground, a mess of fur and bone. I stepped closer, trying to get a better look, and the creature lifted its head. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't even close to human. Its body was twisted and deformed, like something that had crawled out of a nightmare. Its skin was a sickly gray, covered in patches of matted fur. Its head was elongated, almost serpentine, with a mouth full of jagged yellow teeth. It had no eyes that I could see, just empty sockets that seemed to weep some dark, oily fluid. I must have made a noise because the thing turned towards me. The smell hit me first, a rancid stench like rotting meat and sulfur. It let out a sound not quite a roar, more like a hiss mixed with a gurgle, and started moving towards me with an unnatural speed, its limbs twitching and jerking like a puppet with its strings cut. I fired. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the trees, but the creature didn't stop. I fired again and again until I emptied the clip. The bullets hit their mark, I saw that much, but they didn't slow it down. It was almost on me now, and I could see the gaping maw of its mouth lined with rows of teeth that seemed to stretch endlessly back into its throat. Then, just as it was about to reach me, it stopped. Its head twitched to the side, as if it was listening to something I couldn't hear, and then it turned and bolted back into the woods, moving with a speed that defied its massive size. I stood there, panting, my gun useless in my hand, trying to process what I'd just seen. I don't remember how long I stood there, but eventually I made my way back to Margaret's house. Margaret was waiting for me, her face pressed against the window. When she saw me, she rushed to the door and threw it open. "What happened? What was it?" she asked, her voice shaky. I shook my head, still trying to find the words. "I don't know, Margaret. I don't know what it was, but it's gone now." She nodded. but I could see the fear in her eyes. "You saw it, didn't you? You saw the thing that's been killing the animals?" I didn't answer, just gave her a nod. I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. "I'm going to call in some backup," I said. "You stay inside and keep your doors locked, all right?" She nodded again, and I could see the relief in her eyes as she closed the door. I got back into the cruiser and radioed for backup. I told them there was a dangerous animal in the woods and that we needed to cordon off the area. Within half an hour, a few more units arrived. We set up a perimeter around the woods, but we didn't go in. Not yet. I wasn't sure what we were dealing with, and I didn't want to send anyone in there blind. A few hours later, the sun started to come up and the fog began to lift. We went into the woods then, me and a couple of the other officers. We found the body of the animal the creature had been tearing into. It was a deer, or what was left of it. There wasn't much, just bits of fur and bones scattered around, like the thing had chewed it up and spit it out. We searched the area for any sign of the creature, but there was nothing. No tracks, no blood, nothing. It was like the thing had just disappeared. We called in animal control, but they didn't find anything either. They said it was probably just a bear. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen, and it wasn't a bear. I went back to the station and they put the report down as an animal attack. They didn't believe me, but that was fine. I didn't need them to. I knew what I'd seen, and so did Margaret. That was enough for me. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen in those woods. I tried to go about my normal routine, but everything felt off. The town seemed quieter, more subdued. People were staying in after dark, locking their doors, keeping their pets inside. I started digging into the town's history, looking for anything that might explain what I'd seen. I spent hours at the library, poring over old newspapers and town records. Margaret helped when she could, pulling out dusty old books and pointing me towards local legends and folklore. Most of it was the usual small-town stuff, ghost stories, tales of witches and curses. But there was one story that caught my attention. Back in the 1800s, there had been a series of disappearances in Reading. People vanishing without a trace, mostly drifters and outsiders. The townsfolk at the time had blamed it on wild animals, but there were whispers of something else. Something that lived in the woods, something that wasn't quite natural. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, that I was grasping at straws, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. As I dug deeper, I started noticing other things, small things at first, more missing pets, livestock found mutilated on the outskirts of town. Then bigger things. A hiker went missing in the state park just outside of town. Search and rescue combed the area for days, but found nothing. And then there were the noises. People all over town reported hearing strange sounds at night. A low rumbling growl, a high-pitched keening that set their teeth on edge, the same metallic grinding I'd heard that night in the woods. I tried to keep a lid on things to keep people calm, but word was spreading. People were scared, and they had every right to be. It was about a month after my first encounter when it happened again. This time it was broad daylight. I was patrolling the edge of town near where the woods met the farmland when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But then it moved. It was in a field, crouched low in the tall grass. I could see its back rising and falling as it breathed, see the way its muscles rippled under its gray skin. It was bigger than I remembered, its body twisted and malformed in ways that defied logic. I reached for my radio, but before I could call it in, the thing's head snapped up. It turned towards me, and even from a distance I could feel the weight of its eyeless gaze. For a moment neither of us moved. Then, with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something its size, it bolted. Not towards me, but towards the woods. I gave chase, calling it in as I ran, but by the time backup arrived, the thing was long gone. We searched the area, but like before, there was no trace. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing to indicate that anything had been there at all. But this time, we did find something. In the field where I'd first spotted the creature, we found a body. It was a cow, or what was left of it. The poor animal had been torn apart, its insides strewn across the grass. The farmer who owned the field said he'd checked on his herd just that morning. Whatever had done this had done it in broad daylight, in a matter of hours. As we stood there looking at the carnage, I could feel the mood shift. This wasn't something we could ignore anymore. This wasn't just a wild animal, this was something else entirely. The town hall was packed, every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls, spilling out into the hallway. The air was thick with tension and fear. I stood at the front of the room next to Mayor Hoffman and Sheriff Benson. We'd called this meeting to address the growing concerns, to try and calm people down. But looking out at the sea of worried faces, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Mayor Hoffman stepped up to the microphone first. He tried to reassure everyone, talking about increased patrols and safety measures. But I could see that his words weren't having much effect. These people wanted answers, and platitudes weren't going to cut it. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath. I knew what I was about to say would change everything, but I couldn't keep quiet anymore. These people deserve to know the truth. I know you're all scared, I began, and you have every right to be. What we're dealing with, it's not a normal animal. It's something else, something I've never seen before. A murmur ran through the crowd. I could see Sheriff Benson shifting uncomfortably beside me, but I pressed on. I told them everything, about what I'd seen in the woods that night, about the encounter in the field. I described the creature in detail, watched as faces paled and eyes widened. When I finished, the room erupted. People were shouting, demanding answers, calling for action. It took Sheriff Benson firing a shot into the air to quiet them down. In the end, we agreed on a plan. We'd form search parties, arm ourselves, and comb the woods. We'd set up a curfew, warn people to stay inside after dark. And we'd reach out to the state police, maybe even the feds if we had to. As the meeting broke up, I could feel the weight of what we were about to do settling over me. We were going to hunt this thing down, whatever it was, and God help us if we found it. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. We organized search parties, set up patrols, fortified the town as best we could. People were scared, but there was a determination in the air. We were going to face this thing head on. I led one of the search parties into the woods. We were armed to the teeth, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our weapons were useless against whatever this thing was. For days we searched. We combed every inch of those woods, but found nothing. No tracks, no lairs, no sign of the creature at all. It was like it had vanished into thin air. But we knew it was still out there. Every night we could hear it, that low grinding noise echoing through the trees, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, but always there. People started to get jumpy. Trigger fingers got itchy. More than once someone fired at a shadow or a rustling bush, only to find nothing there. And then, on the 5th day of the search, we found something. It wasn't the creature, but it was something. We were deep in the woods, in an area we'd never really explored before. The trees were older here, gnarled and twisted. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and then we saw it. It was a clearing, perfectly circular, about 50 feet across. In the center was a stone structure, like an altar or a tomb. It was old, covered in moss and lichen, but you could still make out strange symbols carved into its surface. As we approached, the air seemed to thicken. The sounds of the forest fell away, leaving an eerie silence. And then we heard it, that grinding noise, louder than ever before, coming from all around us. We formed a circle, backs to each other, weapons raised. But there was nothing there, nothing we could see anyway. But we could feel it, a presence, malevolent and ancient, watching us. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The noise cut off, the oppressive feeling lifted. We were left standing there, hearts pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. We took photos, made notes, but we didn't touch anything. Something told me that disturbing this place would be a very, very bad idea. As we made our way back to town, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled onto something big, something that went beyond a simple monster in the woods. This was older, deeper, and I had a sinking feeling that we were in way over our heads. Back in town, things were getting worse. People were on edge, jumping at shadows. There had been more sightings of the creature, always just glimpses, always on the outskirts of town. I threw myself into research, trying to find any information about the stone structure we'd found. I spent hours in the library, poring over old books and records. Margaret helped when she could, but even she seemed shaken by what was happening. And then, buried in an old journal from one of the town's founders, I found something. A reference to an ancient evil, something that had been in these woods long before the town was built. Something that slept for years, decades at a time, only to wake and feed. The journal spoke of a pact, a deal made with this thing. The town would provide sacrifices, and in return the creature would leave them in peace. But as the years passed, the pact was forgotten. The sacrifices stopped. And now, it seemed, the creature had awakened once more. I didn't want to believe it. The idea that our town, our home, could have such a dark secret was almost too much to bear. But as I read more, as I pieced together the clues, I knew it was true. The disappearances over the years, the missing people that were never found. They weren't accidents or runaways. They were sacrifices. I sat there in the library, surrounded by dusty old books, feeling the weight of this knowledge settle over me. I knew I had to tell someone, had to do something, but who would believe me? And more importantly, what could we do about it? As I left the library that night, I could feel eyes on me. Not just the nervous glances of my fellow townspeople, but something else. Something watching from the shadows, patient and hungry. I made my way home, my mind racing with what I'd learned. The weight of the town's dark history pressed down on me, making each step feel like I was wading through mud. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself, but I also knew that sharing this information could tear our community apart. That night sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, haunted by visions of the creature and the stone altar in the woods. In my dreams I saw generations of townsfolk, their faces twisted in fear and guilt, leading innocents into the dark heart of the forest. I woke up drenched in sweat, the echoes of screams ringing in my ears. The next morning I called an emergency meeting with Sheriff Benson and Mayor Hoffman. We met in the sheriff's office, the blinds drawn and the door locked. Their faces grew pale as I laid out what I'd discovered. "This can't be true," Mayor Hoffman said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Our ancestors we couldn't have." Sheriff Benson was silent, his face a mask of stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was hard. "If this is true, Royce, we need to end it. Now." I nodded, relief washing over me. I'd been afraid they wouldn't believe me, that they'd dismiss my findings as the ravings of a man pushed to the edge by fear and stress. But they believed me, and more importantly, they were ready to act. We spent the next few hours planning. We couldn't tell the whole town. The panic it would cause would be catastrophic. Instead, we decided to assemble a small team of people we could trust. People who could handle the truth and who had the skills we'd need to face this thing. By nightfall, we had our team. Besides the three of us, there was Margaret from the library, her knowledge of local history invaluable. We also brought in Dr. Evelyn Chen, the town's veterinarian, figuring her expertise might give us some insight into what we were dealing with. Rounding out the group was Sam Reeves, a local hunter who knew the woods better than anyone. We met at the edge of town as the sun was setting, armed with everything we could think might be useful. Guns, yes, but also torches, ropes, first aid kits. Sam had even brought along some heavy-duty animal traps. As we entered the woods, the air seemed to thicken. The usual sounds of the forest, birds, insects, the rustle of small animals, fell away, leaving an eerie silence. We moved slowly, carefully, every sense on high alert. It took us nearly 2 hours to reach the clearing with the stone altar. In the fading light, it looked even more ominous than before. The strange symbols carved into its surface seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering light of our torches. "So what's the plan?" Sam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I realized then that I didn't really have one. We'd come out here driven by the need to do something, anything, to stop this horror that had plagued our town for generations. But standing there in that clearing that reeked of ancient evil, I felt woefully unprepared. Before I could answer, a low, grinding noise filled the air. It was the same sound I'd heard that first night, but louder now, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, vibrating in our bones. We formed a circle, backs to each other, weapons raised. The noise grew louder, drowning out everything else. I could feel it in my teeth, in my skull, a pressure that threatened to overwhelm me. And then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. "There!" Dr. Chen shouted, pointing towards the tree line. I saw it then. A shape, darker than the surrounding shadows, moving with that unnatural, jerky grace I remembered. It was circling us, keeping to the edges of the clearing. "What do we do?" Margaret asked, her voice shaking. Before I could answer, the thing charged. It moved faster than anything that size had a right to, crossing the clearing in the blink of an eye. Sam got off a shot, the sound deafeningly loud in the confined space, but it didn't even slow the creature down. It barreled into our circle, scattering us like bowling pins. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of me. Through watering eyes, I saw it go after Dr. Chen. She screamed, a high, terrified sound that cut through the night. I scrambled to my feet, firing wildly at the creature. My shots joined others. The sheriff and Sam were both emptying their weapons into the thing. It jerked and twitched under the impact, dark fluid seeping from its wounds, but it didn't fall. Instead, it turned towards us, its eyeless face somehow conveying a sense of rage and hunger. It let out that hissing, gurgling roar and charged again. The next few minutes were chaos. We scattered, trying to avoid its charge while still keeping it in our sights. It was smart, using the trees and shadows to its advantage, appearing and disappearing like a nightmare. I lost track of how many times I fired, how many times I heard the creature's roar or my companion's shouts. Time seemed to stretch and warp until it felt like we'd been fighting this thing forever. And then suddenly, I found myself face to face with it. I'd backed up against the stone altar, and the creature had me cornered. Up close, it was even more horrifying than I remembered. Its skin was a patchwork of scales and fur, slick with that dark, oily substance. Its mouth gaped open, rows upon rows of teeth gleaming in the moonlight. I raised my gun, knowing it was useless but unable to do anything else. The creature reared back, ready to strike. And then Margaret's voice rang out, clear and strong. She was standing on top of the altar, an old book in her hands, reading something in a language I didn't understand. The words seemed to hang in the air, vibrating with power. The creature froze. A shudder ran through its massive body, and it let out a sound. Not a roar this time, but a wail of pain and fury. It thrashed as if trying to escape from some invisible force. "Keep reading," I shouted to Margaret. She nodded, her voice growing louder. The air in the clearing began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. The creature's movements became more frantic, more desperate, and then with a sound like reality itself tearing. A hole opened up in the air next to the altar. It was like looking into the depths of space, an absolute, perfect darkness that hurt to look at. The creature let out one final, defiant roar, and then, as if pulled by some immense force, it was dragged into that impossible darkness. The hole snapped shut behind it with a sound like a thunderclap, and just like that, it was over. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the clearing dissipated. The normal sounds of the forest returned, the rustle of leaves, the calls of night birds. We stood there, panting, trying to process what had just happened. Dr. Chen was injured, a nasty gash on her arm where the creature had caught her, but alive. The rest of us were battered and bruised, but otherwise okay. What did you do?" I asked Margaret, my voice hoarse. She looked down at the book in her hands, a mix of awe and fear on her face. "I'm not sure," she said. "I found this in the library, hidden behind some other books. It's some kind of banishing ritual, I think. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try something." I nodded, too exhausted to question it further. We'd won. Somehow, against all odds, we'd won. The walk back to town was quiet. We were all lost in our own thoughts, trying to come to terms with what we'd experienced. The sun was just starting to rise as we emerged from the woods, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It seemed impossible that the world could look so normal, so beautiful, after what we'd been through. We agreed to meet later that day to discuss what had happened and what we should do next. For now, though, we all needed rest and a stiff drink. I went home, took a long, hot shower, and collapsed into bed. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing, heard its unearthly roar. I saw the faces of the people we'd lost over the years, the sacrifices our town had made to keep that horror at bay. When I finally gave up on sleep and got up, it was late afternoon. I made my way to the sheriff's office where the others were already gathered. The mood was somber as we discussed what had happened. We all agreed that the town needed to know the truth, or at least some version of it. We couldn't keep this secret any longer. But how do we tell them? Mayor Hoffman asked. How do we explain all of this? It was a good question and one I didn't have a good answer for. How do you tell a town that their ancestors made a deal with a monster, that people they knew, people they loved, had been sacrificed to keep that monster satisfied? In the end, we decided on a version of the truth. We'd tell them about the creature, about the battle in the woods. We'd tell them it was gone now, banished, but we'd leave out the part about the town's complicity. It was cowardly, perhaps, but we reasoned that knowing the full truth would do more harm than good. The town meeting was difficult. People were scared, angry, confused. There were those who didn't believe us, who thought we were making it all up. But there were enough people who'd seen something, who'd heard the noises in the night, that most accepted our story. In the weeks that followed, things slowly began to return to normal, or as normal as they could be, given what had happened. The fear lingered, of course. People still looked over their shoulders, still jumped at unexpected noises. But as time passed and nothing happened, that fear began to fade. For my part, I couldn't let it go. I spent my free time researching, trying to find out more about what we'd faced. Margaret helped, using her librarian skills to dig up old records and obscure texts. We learned that our town wasn't the only one to have faced something like this. There were stories from all over the world, spanning centuries, of similar creatures. Some called them demons, others ancient gods. Whatever they were, it seemed they'd been haunting humanity for a very long time. But we'd beaten ours. We'd faced the darkness and come out the other side. And if it ever came back, well, we'd be ready. It's been a year since that night in the woods. Reading has changed. We all have. There's a wariness now, a knowledge that the world is bigger and stranger and more dangerous than we'd ever imagined. But there's something else too. A strength, a resilience. We faced the unimaginable and survived. We protected our home, our people. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still find myself looking over my shoulder, especially when I'm near the woods. But I also find myself appreciating things more. The quiet beauty of our town, the kindness of its people, the simple joy of a sunrise or a clear night sky. We don't talk about what happened much. Those of us who were there that night, we have a bond now, unspoken but strong. We meet sometimes, share a drink, remind ourselves that it was real. And if sometimes on quiet nights I think I hear a faint grinding noise from the direction of the woods, well, I tell myself it's just the wind in the trees. Just the wind. But I keep my gun close, just in case. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the monsters are real. And someone has to stand ready to face them. That someone is me. Royce Danforth, small-town cop, monster hunter. God help us all. The gravel crunched under the tires of my old Ford pickup as I navigated the winding dirt road deep into the Montana wilderness. It was the summer of 1992, and I, Liam Roscoe, was returning to a place I thought I'd left behind forever. The dense forest pressed in on both sides of the narrow path, branches scraping against the truck's sides like grasping fingers. I hadn't been back here in over a decade, not since my father passed away. The cabin, our cabin, had sat abandoned all this time, hidden away in the thick woods of eastern Montana. As I rounded the final bend, the trees parted, revealing the familiar clearing. There it stood, a weathered testament to my father's craftsmanship. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, its dark wood siding grayed with age and neglect. The porch sagged slightly, and moss had begun to creep up the foundation, but it was still standing, still solid, just like the memories it held. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling motor and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. The silence out here was profound, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the distant chatter of a squirrel. It was a far cry from the constant noise of Denver, where I'd been struggling to make ends meet as a carpenter for the past year. Work had dried up in the city, leaving me with more bills than income and a growing sense of desperation. I'd come out here to clear my head, to find some peace in the solitude of the wilderness. Maybe, I thought, I could reconnect with something I'd lost along the way. As I stepped out of the truck, the rich scent of pine and damp earth filled my lungs. I stretched, working out the kinks from the long drive, and took a moment to survey my surroundings. The clearing hadn't changed much. Tall grass swayed in the gentle wind, dotted with wildflowers. The tree line formed a dark, imposing wall around the perimeter, a reminder of the vast, untamed wilderness beyond. I grabbed my duffel bag from the truck bed and approached the cabin. The porch steps creaked ominously under my weight, and I made a mental note to check their stability later. The key was right where Dad always kept it, hidden beneath a loose board on the porch railing. Some things never change, I thought with a sad smile. The lock was stiff from disuse, but after a bit of jiggling it gave way with a rusty groan. I pushed the door open, and a waft of stale air hit me like a punch to the gut. It smelled of dust, old wood, and something else, a musty, almost animal scent that I couldn't quite place. I stood in the doorway, letting my eyes adjust to the dim interior. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of sunlight that managed to penetrate the grimy windows. The cabin was a single large room, with a small kitchenette in one corner and a door leading to what I knew was a tiny bathroom. Everything was exactly as I remembered it, frozen in time like a museum exhibit dedicated to my childhood. Dad's old leather armchair still sat by the stone fireplace, its once supple surface now cracked and faded. Above the mantel hung his prized hunting rifle, a beautiful lever-action .30 that had seen better days. The barrel was dull with a fine layer of rust, and I doubted it had been fired in years. Against the far wall stood a bookshelf, its shelves bowing slightly under the weight of dozens of dusty paperbacks. I recognized many of the titles, books on wilderness survival, hunting guides, and well-worn Louis L'Amour westerns that Dad used to read aloud on stormy nights. As I moved further into the cabin, memories flooded back. I could almost hear the crackling of the fire, smell Mom's venison stew simmering on the old wood stove, and feel the warmth of those long-ago family gatherings. But those days were gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness that seemed to permeate every corner of the cabin. I set my bag down and got to work. The place needed a good cleaning if I was going to stay here for any length of time. I opened the windows to let in some fresh air and began sweeping out years of accumulated dust and debris. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every so often I'd glance out the window, half expecting to see someone, or something, staring back at me from the tree line. But there was never anything there, just the wind stirring the branches and my own overactive imagination. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, I finished up the basic cleaning and decided to head into town for supplies. The drive took about an hour, winding through increasingly civilized terrain until I reached the small town of Pinewood. It wasn't much, a general store, a gas station, a small diner, and a smattering of houses. But it was the closest thing to civilization for miles around. The bell above the door jingled as I entered Hank's general store. The place was a throwback, with wooden floors that creaked underfoot, and shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to fishing tackle. Behind the counter stood an older man with a salt and pepper beard and deep-set eyes that seemed to scrutinize my every move. "Evening," he said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "Don't recognize you. Just passing through?" I shook my head as I grabbed a basket and began filling it with essentials. "No, I'm staying up at the old Roscoe cabin. My father built it years ago." The man's eyebrows shot up in recognition. "Roscoe, you say? You must be Jim's boy, Liam, right?" I nodded, surprised he remembered. "That's right. I haven't been back here in years." The old man, Hank I presumed, leaned on the counter, his expression turning serious. "Listen, son, I don't mean to pry, but are you sure about staying up there, that area?" "Well, it's seen its share of trouble lately." I paused in my shopping, meeting his gaze. What kind of trouble? Hank glanced around as if checking to see if anyone else was listening, then lowered his voice. There's been talk, people gone missing in those woods, hikers mostly, but a couple of hunters too, good men who knew the area well. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to keep my voice steady. Could be anything though, right? People get lost in the woods all the time. Hank shook his head slowly. Not like this. And it's not just the disappearances. People have seen things, strange lights in the sky, noises that ain't natural, and tracks, big tracks that don't match any animal around these parts. I wanted to dismiss it as small-town superstition, but something in Hank's eyes made me hesitate. He wasn't trying to scare me. He genuinely believed what he was saying. I appreciate the warning, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt, but I can handle myself. My dad taught me well. Hank nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Just be careful out there, son. And if you see anything unusual, you hightail it back to town, you hear? I promised I would and finished my shopping, my mind racing with what Hank had told me. As I loaded the supplies into my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a mistake. But I'd come too far to turn back now. Whatever was out there in those woods, I told myself, I was ready for it. The drive back to the cabin seemed longer, darker. The trees loomed closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the glow of my headlights. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, night had fully fallen, and the forest was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. I hurried inside, my arms laden with supplies, and quickly set about securing the cabin for the night. I checked the locks, drew the curtains, and built a fire in the fireplace to ward off the chill that had settled in the air. As I sat in my father's old armchair, staring into the flames, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd gotten myself into. The cabin suddenly felt very small, very vulnerable in the vast expanse of the wilderness. And somewhere out there, beyond the warm circle of firelight, something was waiting, watching. I could feel it. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to the very limits of sanity and survival. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls as I settled into the worn leather armchair. Despite the warmth, a chill ran down my spine. Hank's warnings echoed in my mind, mixing with the unfamiliar night sounds of the forest. I tried to distract myself by leafing through one of Dad's old survival guides, but my eyes kept darting to the windows. The curtains were drawn, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching, waiting. Around midnight, I decided to turn in. The bedroom was small, just big enough for a single bed and a nightstand. I changed into an old t-shirt and sweatpants, then slipped under the musty blankets. The mattress creaked beneath me, and I stared up at the ceiling, listening to the wind whisper through the trees outside. Sleep came fitfully, filled with half-formed dreams of shadowy figures moving just beyond my field of vision. I tossed and turned, the unfamiliar sounds of the forest keeping me on edge. Sometime after 2 a.m., I jerked awake, my heart pounding. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back, the cabin, the woods, Hank's warnings. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. There, a sound. Not the wind, not the usual forest noises. This was different, deliberate. The unmistakable snap of a twig, followed by the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. Something was moving outside the cabin. I slid out of bed, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Grabbing the flashlight from the nightstand, I crept to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtains. The clearing was bathed in pale moonlight, the grass rippling in a light breeze. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then a movement caught my eye. At the edge of the tree line, something shifted in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I squinted, trying to make out what it was. For a brief moment I thought I saw a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, its proportions all wrong for a human or any animal I knew. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, melting back into the darkness of the forest. I stumbled back from the window, my mind racing. What the hell had I just seen? I wanted to dismiss it as a trick of the light, a product of my overactive imagination and Hank's stories. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever it was, it had been real, and it had been watching the cabin. Sleep was out of the question now. I made my way to the main room, switching on lights as I went. The cabin suddenly felt claustrophobic, the walls pressing in around me. I grabbed Dad's old rifle from above the fireplace, checking it over with trembling hands. The action was stiff with disuse, and I had no ammunition. It was useless as anything but a club, but holding it made me feel a little better. I spent the rest of the night in the armchair, the rifle across my lap, jumping at every sound. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, I finally began to relax. Whatever I had seen, or thought I had seen, was gone now, retreated back into the depths of the forest. But as I stood and stretched my stiff muscles, a movement outside caught my eye. I approached the window cautiously, peering out into the misty morning. There, at the edge of the clearing, the grass was bent and flattened in a distinct path leading from the trees to within a few yards of the cabin. And in the soft earth near the porch steps, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A footprint, but not like any I'd ever seen before. It was huge, easily twice the size of my own foot, with long, spindly toes that ended in what looked like sharp claws. The print was deep, as if whatever had made it was incredibly heavy. I stumbled back from the window, my mind reeling. This was real, this was happening, and I was alone out here, miles from help, with something in these woods that defied explanation. As I stood there trying to process what I'd seen, a new sound cut through the morning quiet. A scream. High-pitched and terrified, it echoed through the trees, sending birds scattering from their perches. It sounded human, but there was something off about it, something that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the scream cut off. The silence that followed was deafening. I knew I should do something. Investigate, try to help whoever or whatever had made that sound. But fear kept me rooted to the spot. I was no hero, and I was beginning to realize just how in over my head I truly was. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I finally worked up the courage to venture outside. The morning was crisp and clear, with no sign of the terror that had gripped me during the night. I examined the footprint more closely, my sense of dread growing with each passing moment. This was no bear, no known predator. This was something else entirely. I spent the next hour searching the area around the cabin, looking for any other signs of the creature. But aside from the flattened grass and that single terrifying footprint, there was nothing. It was as if the thing had simply vanished into thin air. As I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring into the dense forest beyond, I knew I had a decision to make. I could pack up and leave, head back to civilization and try to forget this ever happened. Or I could stay, try to uncover the truth behind what was happening in these woods. The smart thing would be to leave, to run as far and as fast as I could, but something kept me rooted here. Maybe it was stubbornness or a misguided sense of duty to uncover the truth. Or maybe deep down I knew that whatever was out there wouldn't simply let me walk away. One thing was certain. I couldn't face this alone. I needed help, information, anything that might give me an edge against the unknown terror lurking in the forest. With a heavy heart, I made my way back to the cabin. I had calls to make and preparations to begin. Whatever was out there, I had a feeling it would be back. And next time, I needed to be ready. The next few days passed in a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I fortified the cabin as best I could, boarding up windows and reinforcing the door. But deep down I knew that if whatever I'd seen decided to come for me, these meager defenses wouldn't stand a chance. I made several trips into town, each time hoping to glean more information about the strange occurrences in the area. Hank at the general store was helpful, but his knowledge was limited to local gossip and legends. I needed more. On my third trip into Pinewood, I finally caught a break. As I was loading supplies into my truck, an older woman approached me. She was small and wiry, with sharp eyes that seemed to look right through me. "You're Jim Roscoe's boy, aren't you?" she asked without preamble. I nodded, surprised. "Yes, ma'am, Liam Roscoe." She looked me up and down, as if assessing my worth. "I'm Margaret Holbrook. I knew your father. Good man." She paused, glancing around before continuing in a lower voice. "I hear you've been asking questions about the woods, about the things people have seen?" My heart raced. Finally, someone who might have real information. Yes, I have. Do you know something about it? Margaret's eyes narrowed. Not here, she said. Meet me at the old church on the edge of town, 1 hour. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. An hour later, I pulled up to the abandoned church. It was a small, weathered building on the outskirts of town, its white paint peeling and its steeple listing slightly to one side. Margaret's beat-up station wagon was already parked in the overgrown lot. I found her inside, sitting in one of the few remaining pews. The interior was musty and dim, shafts of sunlight cutting through the dusty air from holes in the roof. Margaret motioned for me to sit beside her. What I'm about to tell you, she began without preamble, is not something I share lightly. Most folks around here, they don't want to know the truth. They're content to live with their eyes closed to what's really out there. I leaned in, hanging on her every word. What is out there, Mrs. Holbrook? She sighed, suddenly looking much older. Something old, something that doesn't belong in this world. The Native Americans who lived here long ago had stories about it. They called it the Wendigo. Wendigo, I repeated, the unfamiliar word sending a chill down my spine. Margaret nodded. A spirit of hunger and winter, but more than that. It's a corruption, a disease that spreads through the forest like a cancer. It twists nature, warps animals and people alike into something else. I thought back to the footprint I'd seen, the impossibly tall figure at the edge of the woods. I've seen something, I admitted, or at least I think I have. Margaret's eyes widened. Then you're lucky to be alive. The Wendigo, it doesn't just kill, it consumes, body and soul. But what can we do about it? I asked, feeling a mix of fear and determination. She shook her head. Do? Boy, the best thing you can do is leave. Get as far away from these woods as you can and never look back. But I couldn't do that, not now that I knew the truth. There has to be a way to stop it, I insisted. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. There might be, she said finally, but it's dangerous, the kind of dangerous that gets people killed. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old leather-bound book. This belonged to my grandfather. He was what the natives called a Skinwalker, a holy man who could commune with the spirits. He spent his life trying to understand the Wendigo, to find a way to banish it. She handed me the book. It was heavy, the pages yellowed with age. Everything he learned is in here, but be warned, Liam, knowledge comes at a price. Once you start down this path, there's no turning back. I took the book, feeling its weight in my hands. Thank you, I said. I'll be careful. Margaret fixed me with a stern look. See that you are. And Liam, whatever you do, don't let it touch you. The Wendigo's corruption spreads through contact. One touch is all it takes. With those ominous words ringing in my ears, I left the church. The sun was setting as I drove back to the cabin, casting long shadows across the road. The forest seemed darker somehow, more menacing. Back at the cabin, I pored over the book Margaret had given me. It was filled with strange symbols and dense text in a language I didn't recognize. But there were also pages in English, detailing encounters with the Wendigo and theories on its nature. According to the book, the Wendigo was more than just a physical threat. It was a spiritual corruption, a hunger that could never be satisfied. It could possess people, turning them into ravenous, inhuman creatures. But worse than that, it could infect the land itself, twisting the natural world into a nightmarish reflection of its own insatiable appetite. As I read, a plan began to form in my mind. The book spoke of a ritual, a way to potentially banish the Wendigo. But it would require venturing deep into the heart of its territory, to the place where the veil between our world and its was thinnest. I spent the next few days gathering supplies and studying the ritual. All the while, I could feel eyes on me, watching from the woods. Strange noises echoed through the trees at night, and more than once I woke to find new tracks around the cabin, always just out of sight of my makeshift alarms and traps. On the 7th night after my meeting with Margaret, I knew it was time. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the forest. According to the book, this was when the Wendigo's power would be at its peak, but also when it would be most vulnerable to the ritual. I packed a bag with the necessary supplies, candles, herbs, a silver knife that had belonged to my father. The book went into the bag as well. As I stepped out of the cabin, the cool night air raised goosebumps on my skin. The forest was unnaturally quiet as I made my way along the overgrown trail. No insects chirping, no nocturnal animals scurrying through the underbrush. It was as if the entire wood was holding its breath, waiting. I had gone about a mile when I first heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly I turned, shining my flashlight into the darkness between the trees. There, just at the edge of the light's reach, I saw them, eyes, dozens of pairs of eyes, glowing with an unholy light. They were set at various heights, some close to the ground, others impossibly high up. Whatever these creatures were, they weren't natural. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, the sounds of pursuit close behind. Snarls and howls filled the air, along with a high, keening wail that could have been the wind, if not for the intelligence and malice behind it. I burst into a small clearing and skidded to a stop. There, in the center, stood a massive, gnarled tree. Its trunk was twisted into a shape that was almost human, its branches reaching out like grasping arms. This had to be the place the book described, the heart of the Wendigo's power. With shaking hands, I began to set up the ritual, candles placed in a circle, herbs burning in a small brazier. I could hear my pursuers crashing through the woods, getting closer by the second. There was no time for doubt, no room for error. As I began to chant the words from the book, the air grew thick and heavy. The moonlight seemed to bend, casting strange shadows across the clearing. The voices in the forest rose to a fever pitch, a cacophony of inhuman screams and howls. And then, silence. A silence so complete it was deafening. Slowly I turned. There, at the edge of the clearing, it stood. The Wendigo. It was tall, impossibly so, its limbs long and spindly. Its skin was a sickly pale gray stretched tight over protruding bones. But its face was the stuff of nightmares. Empty black eyes stared at me from sunken sockets. Its mouth, filled with needle-sharp teeth, split its face in a grotesque parody of a smile. For a moment neither of us moved. Then, with a speed that defied its gangly frame, the Wendigo charged. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as its claws narrowly missed me. I scrambled to my feet, desperately trying to remember the next part of the ritual. The Wendigo wheeled around, its mouth opening in a roar that shook the very ground. As it lunged for me again, I thrust the silver knife forward. The blade sank into its chest, and the creature let out a shriek of pain and fury. But it didn't fall. Instead, its hand closed around my wrist, its touch burning like ice. I could feel it then, the corruption Margaret had warned me about. It crawled up my arm like living frost, bringing with it a hunger so profound it threatened to consume me. With the last of my strength, I pushed the Wendigo away and staggered back to the center of the ritual circle. The words of the final incantation tore from my throat, my voice growing hoarser with each syllable. The Wendigo thrashed and howled, caught between the physical world and whatever dark realm it called home. As I spoke the last word, a blinding light filled the clearing. The Wendigo's screams reached a deafening crescendo, and then silence. When my vision cleared, the creature was gone. The twisted tree in the center of the clearing had turned to ash, scattering in the gentle breeze. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and shaken. My arm where the Wendigo had grabbed me was numb, the skin pale and waxy. I knew the corruption was inside me now, a seed of the creature's insatiable hunger. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I made my way back to the cabin. I had won, but at what cost? The Wendigo was gone, banished back to whatever dark dimension it had come from, but part of it lived on in me. I packed my things quickly, knowing I couldn't stay. The corruption would spread, slowly but surely. I had to find a way to contain it, to keep the hunger at bay. And if I couldn't, well, I'd make sure I was far from anyone I could hurt. As I drove away from the cabin for the last time, I caught a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the trees watching me go. But when I blinked, it was gone. The road stretched out before me, leading away from Pinewood and the horrors I'd encountered in those woods. But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end. The Wendigo's hunger lived on, in the land and in me. and someday somehow it would return. Until then I would keep moving, staying one step ahead of the corruption growing inside me. And I would be ready, for I had seen the true face of hunger, of insatiable appetite given form. And I knew that in the dark corners of the world, in the shadows between what is and what should not be, other horrors waited. The cabin in the woods was behind me now, but the real nightmare was just beginning. Years have passed since that fateful night in the Montana wilderness. I've traveled far and wide, always moving, never staying in one place for too long. The corruption the Wendigo left in me is a constant companion, a hunger that gnaws at the edges of my consciousness. I've learned to control it mostly. Meditation, strict dietary regimens, and the occasional ritual cleansing keep the worst of it at bay. But there are times, especially during the long, cold nights of winter, when I feel it stirring. In those moments, I can almost hear the Wendigo's call, feel the pull of the forest. I've dedicated my life to tracking down and documenting other supernatural occurrences. The world, I've learned, is far stranger and more dangerous than most people realize. My experiences in Pinewood opened my eyes to a hidden reality, one that exists alongside our own. Sometimes I hear whispers of other Wendigo sightings, reports of missing hikers in national parks, of strange creatures glimpsed in the shadows of dense forests. Each time I pack my bags and head out, hoping to help but also dreading what I might find. The book Margaret gave me has become my most prized possession. I've spent countless hours studying its pages, deciphering its secrets. There's so much more to learn, so many other entities and phenomena to understand. But always, in the back of my mind, I know that someday I'll have to return to Pinewood. The Wendigo may be gone, but its influence lingers, and I fear that my unfinished business there may someday draw me back to where it all began. Until then, I'll keep moving, keep searching, for answers, for redemption, and for a way to finally quell the hunger that burns inside me. The cabin in the woods may be a distant memory, but the horrors I encountered there will stay with me forever. In the end, I've come to realize that the true monsters aren't always the ones lurking in the shadows. Sometimes the most terrifying battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. And in that eternal struggle between light and dark, hunger and restraint, humanity and savagery, we find the truest test of our strength and character. So I'll keep fighting, keep searching for answers, because in a world where Wendigos and other horrors exist, someone has to stand guard in the darkness. Someone has to be ready when the long night comes. And who better than someone who stared into the abyss and come back changed, but not broken? Who better than someone who carries a piece of the darkness within them? The road stretches out before me, leading to the next mystery, the next confrontation with the unknown. And as I drive into the gathering dusk, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, watching for a tall, thin figure that's always just out of sight. The hunt continues. The hunger remains, and somewhere out there in the deep, dark woods, ancient horrors wait to be discovered. I have never been one for the great outdoors. The comfort of my small apartment in Portland, with its reliable Wi-Fi and absence of mosquitoes, has always been more my speed. But when my friends Megan and David started pushing for a camping trip, I found myself running out of excuses. "Come on, Charlie," Megan had pleaded, her green eyes wide with excitement. "It'll be good for you to get away from your computer for once." David, ever the adventurer, chimed in. "Yeah, man, a weekend in the wild will do wonders for your stress levels. You've been working too hard lately." They weren't wrong. My job as a software developer had been eating up more and more of my time, and the bags under my eyes were starting to look like permanent fixtures. Still, the thought of spending a weekend without modern amenities filled me with dread. "I don't know, guys," I hedged. "I'm not exactly the outdoorsy type." "That's exactly why you need this," David insisted. "Trust me, you'll thank us later." After another week of persistent cajoling, I finally caved. "Fine," I sighed, "but if I get eaten by a bear, I'm blaming you both." Little did I know, as I reluctantly packed my bag with borrowed camping gear, that bears would be the least of our worries. The morning of our departure dawned bright and clear, a deceptively perfect day for a camping trip. I stumbled out of my apartment, bleary-eyed and clutching a travel mug of coffee like a lifeline. David's old Subaru was idling at the curb, loaded down with tents, sleeping bags, and enough trail mix to feed a small army. "There he is," David called out, his enthusiasm grating on my pre-caffeine nerves. "Ready for an adventure, Charlie?" I grunted in response, tossing my bag in the trunk and climbing into the back seat. Megan turned around from the passenger seat, her smile sympathetic. "Don't worry," she said. "We'll make an outdoorsman of you yet." As we pulled away from the familiar streets of Portland, I felt a twinge of unease. The city skyline receded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the looming shadows of trees. We were headed for a campsite in the Mount Hood National Forest, a place David swore was off the beaten path and totally awesome. The first hour of the drive was uneventful, filled with upbeat music and casual conversation. But as we delved deeper into the forest, the mood in the car began to shift. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The road narrowed, turning from smooth asphalt to rough gravel that rattled the car's old suspension. David?" I leaned forward, peering at the dense forest around us. "Are you sure this is the right way?" David's confident smile faltered for a moment. "Yeah, of course, it's just a bit further." But an hour later, we were still driving, and the forest showed no signs of thinning. The gravel road had given way to little more than a dirt track, and the car's GPS had long since lost signal. "Guys," Megan said, her voice tight with concern, "I think we might be lost." David's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We can't be. The ranger at the station gave me clear directions." "Clear directions to where?" I asked, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. "The middle of nowhere?" As if on cue, the car sputtered and jerked. David swore, glancing at the dashboard. "We're almost out of gas." A heavy silence fell over the car. We were lost in the dense forests of northern Oregon, low on fuel, with no cell signal and dwindling daylight. What had started as a reluctant weekend getaway was quickly turning into something far more ominous. "Look!" Megan suddenly exclaimed, pointing ahead. "There's a sign." Through the gathering gloom, we could just make out a weathered wooden sign, Oak Ridge Trail, camping grounds 10 miles. David let out a relieved laugh. "See? I told you we were on the right track." But as we turned onto the narrow path indicated by the sign, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were driving deeper into danger. The trees loomed closer, their shadows deepening as the sun began to set. Something about this place felt wrong, a primal instinct screaming at me to turn back. If only we had listened to that instinct, if only we had known what awaited us in the darkness of those woods. But we drove on, oblivious to the horrors that lay ahead, as the forest swallowed us whole. The 10 miles to the camping grounds felt like an eternity. The narrow, winding path forced David to slow to a crawl, the car's headlights barely penetrating the oppressive darkness of the forest. Every bump and jolt had us on edge, our eyes straining to catch any glimpse of our destination. When we finally broke through into a clearing, the relief was palpable. But it was short-lived. "This can't be right," Megan murmured, peering out the window. The camping grounds were little more than a small, overgrown clearing. There were no facilities, no other campers, nothing to indicate this was an official site. The only sign of human presence was a battered old RV parked at the far end of the clearing, its windows dark and uninviting. David killed the engine, and suddenly we were enveloped in silence. No crickets chirped, no owls hooted. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath. "Maybe we should keep going," I suggested, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. David shook his head. "We can't. We're almost out of gas, and it's too dark to keep driving on these roads. We'll set up camp here and figure things out in the morning." Reluctantly, we climbed out of the car. The air was thick and heavy, carrying a faint, unpleasant odor I couldn't quite place. As we unloaded our gear, I kept glancing at the old RV, half expecting to see a face peering out at us. We set up our tents as quickly as we could, fumbling with poles and stakes in the dim light of our flashlights. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had us jumping, our nerves frayed by the eerie silence and the feeling of being watched. "Should we?" Should we check out the RV? Megan asked hesitantly. Maybe whoever's in there knows more about this place. David and I exchanged uneasy glances. Let's wait till morning, David decided. No need to disturb anyone this late. As we huddled around our small campfire, eating granola bars in lieu of a proper dinner, the gravity of our situation began to sink in. We were lost in an unknown part of the forest, with limited supplies and no way to call for help. First thing tomorrow, we'll try to find a ranger station or a town, David said, trying to sound confident. We can't be that far from civilization. But as I crawled into my tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were further from safety than we could possibly imagine. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by strange noises from the forest and the constant nagging feeling of being watched. In the early hours of the morning, I was jolted awake by a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling our campsite. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, hardly daring to breathe as the footsteps drew closer to my tent. Then, just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. I waited, heart pounding, for what felt like hours, but nothing more happened. When dawn finally broke, I emerged from my tent to find Megan and David already up, their faces pale and drawn. "Did you hear?" Megan began, but I cut her off with a nod. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now." But as we turned to break camp, we realized with growing horror that our situation had gone from bad to worse. The car's tires were slashed, deep gashes in the rubber rendering them useless, and there, scratched crudely into the hood of the car, was a message that made my heart stop. "You shouldn't have come here." The sight of the vandalized car and the menacing message sent a wave of panic through our small group. Megan let out a choked sob while David swore loudly, kicking at the flattened tires in frustration. "This is impossible," he muttered, running his hands through his hair. "We didn't hear anything. How could someone do this without us noticing?" I found myself staring at the old RV across the clearing. In the pale morning light, it looked even more decrepit, its rusty exterior covered in years of grime and neglect. "Do you think—" I began, nodding towards the vehicle. David followed my gaze, his expression hardening. Only one way to find out. As we approached the RV, the feeling of wrongness that had been nagging at me since we arrived intensified. The unpleasant odor I'd noticed the night before was stronger here, a sickly sweet smell that made my stomach churn. David rapped sharply on the RV's door. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" No response. He tried the handle, and to our surprise, the door swung open with a rusty creak. The smell that wafted out was overwhelming, a mix of decay and something else I couldn't identify. Megan gagged, turning away, but David and I peered inside. The interior of the RV was a scene of chaos and filth. Rotting food containers littered every surface, mixed with scraps of cloth and what looked disturbingly like bones. But it was the far wall that drew our attention and sent a chill down my spine. Pinned to the wall were dozens of photographs, their edges curling with age. As we looked closer, we realized with growing horror that they were pictures of people, campers, hikers, families, all smiling and unaware. And next to each photo was a date and a crude tally mark. "Oh God," Megan whispered, having summoned the courage to look inside. "Are those—" "We need to leave," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Now. We need to start walking and not stop until we reach a road, a town, anything." David nodded grimly. "Grab only what we can carry easily. Water, food, a weapon if you can find one. We leave in 5 minutes." As we hurriedly packed our backpacks, the forest around us seemed to come alive with malevolent energy. Branches swayed without wind, shadows deepened despite the rising sun, and that feeling of being watched intensified to an almost unbearable degree. Just as we were about to leave, a glint of metal caught my eye. Half buried in the dirt near our campsite was a small tape recorder. With trembling hands, I picked it up and pressed play. A raspy, gleeful voice crackled through the speaker. "Welcome to our playground, city folk. The hunt begins at sundown. Better start running." We didn't need to be told twice. With the tape recorder's chilling message ringing in our ears, we plunged into the forest, our only goal to put as much distance between us and that clearing of horrors as possible. But as we crashed through the underbrush, hearts pounding and breaths coming in ragged gasps, a terrible realization began to dawn. The forest seemed to shift around us, paths appearing and disappearing, landmarks changing. It was as if the woods themselves were alive, conspiring to keep us trapped. And somewhere behind us, drawing ever closer, we could hear the sound of pursuit, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, and worst of all, that same raspy laugh from the tape, echoing through the trees. Our weekend getaway had turned into a desperate fight for survival, and as the sun began its slow descent towards the horizon, we knew that our real ordeal was only just beginning. As we crashed through the undergrowth, the forest seemed to close in around us. Branches clawed at our faces and arms, roots threatened to trip us at every step. The fading daylight filtered weakly through the dense canopy, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out for us with grasping fingers. "We need to find water," David gasped as we paused to catch our breath. "A stream, a river, anything. It might lead us out of here." Megan nodded, her face pale and streaked with tears. "And it'll cover our tracks, right?" I didn't have the heart to tell her that I doubted anything could throw off whoever or whatever was pursuing us. The sounds of movement in the forest behind us had faded, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was stronger than ever. We pushed on, our progress slowing as exhaustion began to set in. The forest floor was treacherous, littered with hidden holes and slippery patches of moss. More than once one of us would stumble, only to be hauled back to our feet by the others. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, we finally heard the faint sound of running water. Hope surged through us, giving us a second wind as we pushed towards the noise. We burst out of the trees onto the bank of a small, swift-running stream. In any other circumstance, it would have been beautiful, clear water babbling over smooth stones, the banks lined with lush ferns. But now it was our lifeline. "Downstream," David said, already wading into the cold water. "It has to lead somewhere." We followed him into the stream, gasping at the shock of the icy water. But it was a relief to our aching feet, and the sound of our splashing progress would hopefully mask any noise we made from our pursuers. As we sloshed downstream, the forest pressing close on either side, I found myself thinking of all the horror movies I'd watched from the safety of my couch, how I'd scoffed at the characters' poor decisions, their panic-driven mistakes. Now I understood. The fear was all-consuming, clouding every thought, every decision. We had been walking for what felt like hours when Megan suddenly stopped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. There, half submerged in the water ahead of us, was a body. As we drew closer, our flashlights illuminating the gruesome scene, we could see that it wasn't just one body. There were three, their limbs entangled as if they'd died trying to cling to each other. Their faces were frozen in expressions of terror, their bodies showing signs of unspeakable violence. "Oh God," Megan choked out, turning away to retch into the stream. David moved closer, his face a mask of horror and determination. They're fresh," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This happened recently." A twig snapped in the forest to our right, loud as a gunshot in the stillness that had fallen over us. We whirled towards the sound, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. For a moment we saw nothing. Then a face appeared between the trees, pale, twisted into a grotesque grin, eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. It was the face from the RV window, the face that had haunted my dreams the night before. "Found you," a raspy voice called out, filled with malicious glee. We ran. Panic lent us speed we didn't know we possessed. We splashed downstream, no longer caring about the noise we made. Behind us we could hear pursuit. Not just one set of footsteps, but many, crashing through the forest on both sides of the stream. "There!" David shouted, pointing ahead. A bridge loomed out of the darkness, a solid structure incongruous in the wild forest. We scrambled up the bank towards the bridge, our waterlogged clothes weighing us down. As we reached the road, headlights suddenly blinded us. A truck screeched to a halt and a voice called out, "Get in, quick!" We didn't hesitate. We piled into the back of the pickup truck, and it roared off before we'd even fully settled. As we sped away, I caught a glimpse of figures emerging from the forest, twisted, misshapen forms that seemed more beast than human. Their howls of rage echoed through the night, chilling me to the bone. As we clung to the sides of the truck, the wind whipping our faces, I finally allowed myself to believe we might survive this nightmare. But our ordeal was far from over. The truck sped down the winding forest road, its headlights cutting through the darkness. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we slowed and turned onto a dirt driveway. A small, run-down cabin came into view, its windows glowing with warm light. The truck came to a stop, and the driver's door opened. A grizzled old man stepped out, his face lined with years of hard living. "Come on," he growled. "Get inside, quickly now." We scrambled out of the truck bed, our legs shaky from the wild ride and lingering fear. As we approached the cabin, I noticed the man was carrying a shotgun, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. Once inside, he bolted the door and drew heavy curtains across the windows. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a worn couch. "Name's Earl. Reckon you folks had a run-in with the Blackwood clan." Megan, David, and I exchanged glances. "The Blackwood clan?" David asked hesitantly. Earl's face darkened. "Bad folk. Been living in these woods for generations. Used to be just thieves and poachers. Now—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Now there's something else. Something worse." As Earl spoke, filling us in on the horrifying history of the Blackwood family and their descent into madness and cannibalism, I felt a growing sense of dread. We had escaped the immediate danger, but we were still deep in hostile territory. "Why did you help us?" I asked suddenly, interrupting Earl's grim tale. He fixed me with a steely gaze. "Been trying to stop 'em for years. Authorities don't believe me or don't care, so I do what I can, save who I can." Just then a howl pierced the night, closer than I would have liked. Earl cursed, moving to peer out a gap in the curtains. "They followed us," he muttered. "Persistent bastards." What happened next was a blur of violence and terror. The windows shattered as misshapen figures burst into the cabin. Earl's shotgun boomed, momentarily deafening us. I caught glimpses of pale, twisted faces and clawing hands as we fought desperately for our lives. In the chaos, I saw Megan go down, screaming as one of the creatures sank its teeth into her arm. David roared with rage, smashing a chair over the thing's head. I fought with desperate strength, my hands finding a heavy fireplace poker that I swung with all my might. When it was over, the cabin floor was slick with blood, some ours, some belonging to the monstrous Blackwoods. Earl was slumped in a corner, his shotgun still clutched in lifeless hands. He had saved us one final time, taking a killing blow meant for David. Megan's arm was badly wounded, and David had a nasty gash across his forehead. I was bruised and battered, but somehow still standing. We knew we couldn't stay here. It was only a matter of time before more came. With heavy hearts, we gathered what supplies we could from Earl's cabin: food, water, his shotgun, and a map of the area. As dawn broke, we set out, hoping to reach the nearest town before nightfall. The forest felt different in the daylight, less oppressive but no less dangerous. We moved as quickly as we could, keeping a wary eye on our surroundings. Megan's injury slowed us down, and we had to stop frequently to rest and rebandage her arm. As the day wore on, we began to hear sounds of pursuit once more. The Blackwoods were hunting us again, their inhuman stamina allowing them to track us tirelessly. We pushed ourselves to our limits, the fear of capture driving us forward. It was late afternoon when we finally broke free of the forest, stumbling onto a paved road. In the distance we could see buildings, civilization at last. But our relief was short-lived. A truck roared around the bend, skidding to a stop in front of us. The driver's face was horribly familiar, the same twisted grin we had seen in the forest. We had walked right into their trap. What followed was a nightmare of captivity and terror. We were taken to the Blackwood compound, a hellish place deep in the forest where the air was thick with the stench of death. I saw things there that will haunt me for the rest of my days, evidence of unimaginable cruelty and depravity. But even in that pit of despair, we didn't give up. We watched, we waited, and we planned. And when the moment came, a lapse in attention, a door left unlocked, we seized our chance. Our escape was not clean or easy. We fought tooth and nail, using every ounce of strength and cunning we had left. David didn't make it. He sacrificed himself to buy us time, holding off our pursuers in a narrow hallway. His final shout of defiance still rings in my ears. Megan and I ran through the night, stumbling and falling, always with the sounds of pursuit close behind. We reached the road again as the first light of dawn broke over the trees. A car approached and we waved frantically, ready to throw ourselves in front of it if necessary. It was a state trooper, responding to reports of strange sightings in the area. He took one look at our battered, blood-stained appearances and immediately called for backup. The next few days were a blur of hospital rooms, police interviews, and tearful reunions with our families. We told our story again and again, to police, to FBI agents, to psychiatrists. Some believed us, some didn't, but the evidence was undeniable. A massive police operation swept through the forest, uncovering the full horrors of the Blackwood compound. It made national news, the Oregon Cannibal Clan, they called it. Dozens of bodies were recovered, years of unsolved disappearances finally explained. But some of the Blackwoods escaped the police raid. Sometimes I wake up in the night sure that I can hear those inhuman howls outside my window. The authorities assure me that I'm safe, that it's all over. But I know better. I've moved back to the city, as far from the forests of Oregon as I could get. I've changed my name, my appearance, everything I could to leave that nightmare behind. But late at night, when the shadows grow long, I know the truth. You can escape the forest, but the forest never really leaves you. And somewhere out there, in the dark woods of the Pacific Northwest, the remnants of the Blackwood clan are still hunting, still waiting. And they remember me. So I keep running, keep hiding, because I know that one day I'll hear that raspy voice again, saying those words that still haunt my dreams. Found you. It's been 5 years since that fateful camping trip. Megan and I still keep in touch, bound by the horrors we survived together. She's doing better these days, the physical and emotional scars slowly fading. She's even talking about writing a book about our experience, though I'm not sure the world is ready for the full truth. As for me, I've tried to move on. I have a new job, a new apartment in a bustling city where the nearest tree is a carefully maintained park specimen. I've been to therapy, taken self-defense classes, installed every security measure I can think of. But I know it's not enough. Because sometimes when I'm walking home late at night, I catch a glimpse of a face in the crowd, pale, twisted, with eyes that reflect the streetlights like an animal's, and I run, my heart pounding, knowing that the hunt isn't over. It will never be over. So I keep my bags packed, ready to run at a moment's notice. I sleep with the lights on and a weapon within reach. And I warn everyone I can, be careful in the wilderness, be careful in the dark places of the world, because you never know what might be hiding there, waiting to pounce. And if you ever find yourself on a winding forest road in northern Oregon, and you see a sign for Oak Ridge Trail, don't stop. Don't even slow down. Just drive. Drive as fast and as far as you can. Because the Blackwoods are still out there, and they're always hungry for new prey. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to filter through the dense canopy of the C.O. Slaw National Forest as I zipped up my jacket and stepped out of the ranger station. The crisp Oregon air filled my lungs, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. It was a smell I'd grown to love over the past 5 years, a far cry from the exhaust fumes and concrete of my former life in the city. My name is James Hawthorne, and I'm a search and rescue officer for the United States Forest Service. It's a job that found me rather than the other way around, and it's as far from my original career path as you can get. Growing up in Chicago, I was the black sheep of my family, the nature-loving oddball in a long line of successful business people. My parents had my life all mapped out. Ivy League education, MBA, cushy corporate job, and for a while I played along. I got my degree from Northwestern, landed a job at a prestigious consulting firm, and spent my days in a suit and tie, crunching numbers and crafting PowerPoint presentations. But every weekend I'd find myself escaping to whatever patch of green I could find. Local parks, nature preserves, anything to scratch that itch for wilderness that had been growing inside me since childhood. It wasn't enough. The more time I spent in those manicured urban parks, the more I longed for something real, something wild. The breaking point came during a particularly soul-crushing week of back-to-back client meetings. I remember sitting in my corner office, staring out at the Chicago skyline and feeling like I was suffocating. That night I went home and applied for every outdoor-related job I could find. My family thought I'd lost my mind when I told them I was leaving my six-figure salary to become a search and rescue officer in Oregon. "You're throwing your life away," my father had said, his disappointment palpable. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was crazy. But as I stand here now, surrounded by towering Douglas firs and the morning mist rising from the forest floor, I know I made the right choice. The Slough National Forest is a world unto itself. Covering over 1 million acres of land, it's a tapestry of diverse ecosystems. Old-growth forests give way to alpine meadows, while crystal-clear rivers carve their way through deep canyons. It's a place where you can walk for days without seeing another human soul, where the silence is so profound you can hear your own heartbeat. But it's not just the landscape that makes this place special. It's the history that seeps from every rock and tree. Native American tribes lived here for thousands of years before European settlers arrived. Loggers, miners, and pioneers all left their mark on these lands. And now, in the 21st century, it's become a haven for hikers, campers, and nature enthusiasts seeking to escape the modern world. Yet for all its beauty, the Slough can be an unforgiving place. The weather can turn on a dime, plunging sunny days into freezing storms. The terrain is rugged and unforgiving, with sheer cliffs and treacherous ravines. And then there's the wildlife, bears, cougars, and other predators that remind us we're not at the top of the food chain out here. That's where I come in. My job is to find those who get lost in this vast wilderness, to bring them home safely. It's a job that requires a unique set of skills, part detective, part outdoorsman, part medic. Every search is different, every rescue a puzzle to be solved. My partner in this work is Dennis Callahan, a guy who couldn't be more different from me if he tried. Where I'm all about the wilderness experience, Dennis is here for the paycheck and the solitude. He's a good man to have at your back in a tough situation, but he doesn't share my passion for the forest. More than once he's told me he thinks I'm crazy for loving this job so much. "You know, James," he said to me once as we were setting up camp during a 3-day search, "most people would kill for the kind of job you left behind. Me? I'm just trying to get by, but you act like every day out here is Christmas morning." I couldn't argue with him. Every day in these woods is a gift, a new adventure waiting to unfold. But little did I know that the adventure ahead of us would test not just our skills, but our very understanding of the world around us. It was a routine morning when everything changed. The call came in just as I was finishing my first cup of coffee. A missing hiker. Not uncommon in these parts, but something about this one felt different from the start. I couldn't have known then how this search would upend my world, how it would force me to question everything I thought I knew about these woods I'd come to call home. This is the story of that search, of the horror we uncovered in the depths of the Slough National Forest. It's a story of survival, of the thin line between the known and the unknown, and it's a warning to those who think they understand the wilderness, because out here, in the shadow of ancient trees and ageless mountains, there are secrets, and some secrets, once uncovered, can never be forgotten. The call about Alice Whelan came in on a crisp autumn morning. She was a 22-year-old college student from Portland, an experienced hiker who'd ventured into the Alsea River area for a week-long solo camping trip. Her family hadn't heard from her in 2 days, well past her scheduled check-in time. "Probably just lost track of time," Dennis said as we loaded up our truck. "You know how these college kids are." But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. Maybe it was the way the dispatcher's voice trembled slightly, or the fact that Alice was known to be meticulous about her hiking plans. Whatever it was, a sense of unease had settled in my gut. The drive to the trailhead was tense. Dennis tried to fill the silence with small talk, but my responses were curt. My mind was already in search mode, running through scenarios, planning our approach. When we arrived at the parking lot, Alice's blue Subaru sat alone, a thin layer of dew on its windows suggesting it hadn't been moved in days. We geared up quickly, each of us carrying enough supplies for a 3-day search if needed. The trail started off easy enough, a well-maintained path winding through towering Douglas firs. But as we pushed deeper into the forest, the trail narrowed, becoming overgrown in places. "Alice," I called out every few minutes, my voice echoing through the trees. Only the occasional bird call answered. Hours passed. The forest grew denser, the light dimming as the canopy thickened overhead. We found nothing. No discarded gear, no signs of a campsite, not even a stray boot print. "Maybe we should head back, try a different trail tomorrow," Dennis suggested as the afternoon waned. I was about to agree when something caught my eye, a flash of color against the brown and green of the forest floor. I moved closer, pushing aside a fern, and felt my heart skip a beat. It was a small notebook, its pages damp and swollen from the forest's humidity. On the cover, in neat handwriting, "Property of Alice Whelan." "Dennis," I called, my voice tight. "I've got something." He jogged over, his eyes widening as he saw the notebook. "Well, I'll be damned." I flipped through the pages carefully. Most of it was typical hiking journal stuff, notes on trail conditions, wildlife sightings, sketches of plants. But the last entry made my blood run cold. "Day 5, something's wrong. The forest feels different. Sounds that shouldn't be there. Shadows moving when they shouldn't. I'm cutting my trip short, heading back tomorrow. If anyone finds this, please." The entry cut off abruptly, a long ink streak trailing off the page as if Alice had been startled mid-sentence. Dennis read over my shoulder, his earlier skepticism evaporating. What the hell happened to her? I shook my head, tucking the notebook into my pack. "I don't know, but we need to keep moving. She can't be far." We pushed on, our senses heightened, every snapping twig and rustle of leaves setting us on edge. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees pressing closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. As dusk approached, we finally found her campsite. It was a small clearing, barely big enough for her tent. A half-burned log smoldered in a makeshift fire pit, wisps of smoke curling upward. Her tent was still erected, but the zip was open, the interior dark and empty. "Alice," I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the gathering gloom. We searched the campsite methodically, but found little of note. Her sleeping bag was still inside the tent, along with some clothes and a book, but her backpack was missing, along with her hiking boots. "Looks like she left in a hurry," Dennis muttered, pointing at the scattered gear. I nodded, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling air. "Yeah, but why leave the tent? And where's her pack?" We decided to make camp there for the night. Neither of us said it, but we both knew the chances of finding Alice alive were dwindling with each passing hour. Sleep didn't come easy. The forest was alive with sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, a presence almost, as if the very air around us was charged with some unseen energy. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, Dennis was shaking me awake. The pale light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the trees. "James," he hissed, his face pale. "Listen." I sat up, straining my ears. At first I heard nothing unusual, just the normal sounds of the forest waking up, but then I caught it. A faint, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing, but deeper, more resonant. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. We broke camp quickly, our movements efficient but tinged with an underlying urgency. The strange sound had faded, but the feeling of being watched remained. We decided to split up to cover more ground. I headed northwest towards the river, while Dennis went south, back towards the main trail. We agreed to meet back at the campsite in 2 hours. The forest was thick here, the trees growing so close together that their branches formed a canopy overhead, blocking out much of the sunlight. As I walked, I felt the familiar quiet of the woods wrap around me, but this time the silence felt oppressive, almost threatening. About an hour into my search, I found it. At first it looked like a bundle of clothes caught on a branch, but as I got closer I saw it was Alice's backpack. It was hanging from a low tree limb, and it had been ripped open, its contents strewn around as if something had torn through it in a frenzy. My hand shook as I reached for my radio. "Dennis," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I found her pack. It's not good." "Stay put," came his reply, crackling with static. "I'm on my way." I waited, every sense on high alert. The forest felt different now, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Dennis arrived 10 minutes later, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. Together we began to examine the area more closely. The pack had been torn by something strong and sharp, not like a knife, but more like claws. I'd seen bear attacks before, but this didn't look the same. Bears don't usually rip packs apart like this, and there was no sign of the food that would have attracted them. "What the hell did this?" Dennis muttered, his voice uneasy. I shook my head. "I don't know, but we need to keep looking. Alice might still be alive." We followed a trail of disturbed vegetation, broken branches, and scattered leaves leading deeper into the forest. The further we went, the more uneasy I felt. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows that made it hard to see clearly. We found her an hour later. The sight is one that will haunt me for the rest of my days. Alice Whelan lay sprawled at the base of a massive, old-growth tree, her body torn and broken in ways that defied simple explanation. Deep gashes marred her arms and legs, her clothing shredded. Her face was frozen in a mask of terror, eyes wide and staring blankly at the darkening sky. Dennis turned away, retching into the underbrush. I forced myself to stay focused, to approach the scene with the detachment of a professional. But inside I was screaming. "We need to get her out of here," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears, "and call this in." We wrapped Alice's body as gently as we could in a blanket we'd brought, then began the long, grim trek back to the campsite. Every sound, every rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. I kept my hand on my knife, though I knew in my heart it would be useless against whatever had done this. Back at the campsite, we radioed for help. The response team would take a few hours to arrive, so we set up camp and waited, keeping the fire burning bright against the encroaching darkness. Dennis and I sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. There was something out there, something dangerous, and we had no idea what it was. The forest, which had always been my sanctuary, now felt alien and hostile. It was around midnight when we heard it, a low, rumbling noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, not quite animal, not quite human. Dennis grabbed his rifle and I drew my knife, standing back to back as we scanned the darkness. The noise grew louder, and the forest around us seemed to close in, the trees leaning closer as if they were watching, waiting. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. "What the hell was that?" Dennis hissed, his voice barely a whisper. I shook my head, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. "I don't know, but we need to stay alert." The hours until dawn were the longest of my life. The noise didn't return, but the feeling of being watched never left. When the first light of morning finally filtered through the trees, it was a relief like I'd never felt before. The response team arrived shortly after sunrise, a mix of Forest Service personnel and local law enforcement. We showed them where we'd found Alice and helped carry her body back to the trailhead. The officers asked us countless questions, but we had few answers. All we knew was that something had killed her, something powerful and ruthless. Days later, the official report came back. They couldn't identify the animal that had attacked Alice, but the injuries were consistent with a large predator. They advised caution in the area, but had no real plan for dealing with whatever was out there. In the weeks that followed, Dennis and I tried to return to our normal routines, but things had changed. The forest, which had always been my sanctuary, now felt like a place of danger and uncertainty. Every time I went out on a search, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd encounter that thing again, if I'd become its next victim. One evening, about a month after the incident, Dennis and I were sitting in the ranger station, going over maps for an upcoming search. The silence between us was heavy, charged with unspoken fears. "Do you think it's still out there?" Dennis asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I looked up from my map, meeting his gaze. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I do." We fell silent again, each lost in our own thoughts. Outside the window, the forest loomed dark and imposing, the trees swaying gently in the wind. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was out there, it was far from finished. In the months that followed, there were more incidents. Hikers reported strange noises, unexplained movements in the undergrowth. 2 more people went missing, their bodies never found. The Forest Service increased patrols, but it felt like putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. I stayed on, driven by a mix of duty and a need to understand what was happening in my beloved forest. But I was changed. The wonder I once felt among the trees was replaced by a constant vigilance, a nagging fear that around any bend, behind any trunk, something unnatural might be lurking. Sometimes on quiet nights when the wind is still, I think I can hear it, that low rumbling sound that defies explanation. And I wonder, not for the first time, if in choosing this life in the wilderness, I've stumbled upon something ancient and terrible, something that was never meant to be discovered. The CO Slaw National Forest keeps its secrets well, but some secrets, once glimpsed, can never be forgotten. And in the deepest, darkest parts of these woods, something is stirring, waiting, watching, and sooner or later it will make itself known again. I had never been the type to share my problems with strangers. Hell, I barely told my closest friends what was really going on. My name is Elias Timmons, and I had learned the hard way that no one wants to hear about the bad stuff. But today the silence was eating at me, maybe because I was deep in the woods of the Allegheny National Forest, miles from anyone who could offer a sympathetic ear, or maybe because I had come out here alone in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, surrounded by 517,000 acres of lush forest, and I felt more claustrophobic than I ever had in my cramped Pittsburgh apartment. The Allegheny's thick canopy closed in around me, the trees standing tall like sentinels from a different time. Beech, birch, and maple stretched their gnarled branches overhead, filtering the afternoon sunlight into a dim, green-tinted glow. The air was cool and damp, with just a hint of rain, carrying the earthy scent of decaying leaves and moss. The forest floor was soft beneath my boots, a thick carpet of fallen leaves and pine needles that muffled my footsteps. There was something peaceful about it, the kind of peace you can only find when you're far away from civilization. That's what I had wanted, a break from the mess that my life had become. The breakup with Jessica had been messy, to say the least, my fault mostly. I had pushed her away without realizing it, and by the time I did, it was too late. She found someone else, someone who wasn't afraid to share his feelings, someone who didn't bury himself in work at the accounting firm, using spreadsheets and tax forms as a shield against intimacy. I could still see the hurt in her eyes when she told me she was leaving. "I can't keep trying to reach you, Elias," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's like you're not even here anymore." And she was right. I hadn't been there. Not really. Not for a long time. So I took off, decided I needed to clear my head, and ended up here, walking a trail that hadn't seen many feet this season, according to the ranger at the visitor center. I didn't have a specific destination in mind, just meandering, really. The silence was broken only by the occasional bird call or the rustle of a squirrel darting through the underbrush. It was good to be alone, I kept telling myself. No one to judge, no one to ask why I wasn't trying harder to get her back. Out here it was just me and the woods. But the woods can be strange. You think you know where you are, think you've got the path figured out. But then you realize that the trees all look the same, the trailblazes have faded, and you're not so sure anymore. That's when I started to feel it. The sense that I wasn't as alone as I thought. I didn't see anything at first, just caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Maybe it was an animal, or maybe just my imagination, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but there was a prickling at the edge of my awareness, like I should be paying more attention to my surroundings. I kept walking, telling myself it was nothing. The trail wound deeper into the forest, the trees growing closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block out more of the fading daylight. The air grew cooler, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. Then I saw it again. This time it was something definite, a shape dark and low to the ground, slipping between the trees about 50 yards to my left. I stopped, listening. The forest had gone quiet, like it was holding its breath. I scanned the area, trying to pick out any movement, but there was nothing. Just trees and lengthening shadows. It was a bear, I thought, or maybe a coyote. They were common enough around here, though they usually stayed away from people. But something about the way it moved didn't sit right with me. It was too fast, too smooth, and the way the forest had gone silent. It was unnatural. I picked up my pace, not running, but definitely walking faster than before. The trail dipped down into a small ravine, the trees growing thicker, the light dimmer. I felt like I was walking into a tunnel, the canopy closing in above me, the shadows growing longer and darker with each step. That's when I heard it, not the sound of something moving, but the sound of something following. It was faint at first, just a rustle in the leaves behind me. I stopped again, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts, and turned around. There was nothing there, no movement, no sound. But I knew with a certainty that I couldn't explain that something was out there watching me. The prickling feeling was stronger now, a weight pressing down on my chest. I needed to get out of here. I started moving again, faster this time, trying to stay calm. My mind raced through the possibilities. What could it be? A bear would have charged by now. A coyote would have circled, maybe a bobcat? But no. This was different. This was something else, something I didn't want to think about. The trail was harder to follow now, the undergrowth thicker, the trees closer together. I could barely see the blazes on the trees, and more than once I had to stop and backtrack to find the path. The thing behind me was getting closer. I could hear it now, the soft crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig. It was like it was toying with me, letting me know it was there, but staying just out of sight. I broke into a run, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the trees blurring past me. I had to get away, had to get out of the ravine and back to higher ground where I might have a chance to see it coming. But the trail was twisting and turning, and I couldn't get my bearings. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out to snag my clothes, roots rising up to trip my feet. And then I did trip. My foot caught on a gnarled root and I went down hard, my head smacking against a rock. Pain shot through my skull, and for a moment everything went black. When I came to, it was twilight. The light was fading fast, and the shadows were long and deep. I struggled to my feet, my head throbbing, and looked around. The trail was gone. In my panic, I had veered off course, and now I was lost, deep in the woods with night closing in. That's when I saw it, clearly for the first time. It was standing on the edge of a small clearing, half hidden by the trees. It was big, bigger than a bear. With a body that was too long and low to the ground, its fur was dark, matted, almost blending with the shadows. And its face... God, its face was wrong, too wrong to describe. It had features like an animal, but they were twisted, almost human in their expression. It didn't move, just stared at me, its body tensed like it was waiting for something. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the cold sweat running down my back. I didn't have a weapon, nothing but my hiking stick, and I knew that wouldn't do much against whatever this thing was. But I wasn't going to just stand there and let it get me. I slowly backed away, keeping my eyes on it, ready to run at the first sign of movement. It watched me go, its head tilting slightly as if it was curious. Then it began to follow. I ran like I had never run before, the adrenaline surging through me, blocking out the pain in my head, the fear in my chest. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the undergrowth, faster than it had any right to be. The ground sloped upward, and I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I reached the top of the rise and saw it. A cabin, small and weathered, tucked into the trees. The door was open, light spilling out, and I bolted for it, praying it wasn't a mirage, that I wasn't hallucinating from the blow to my head. I burst through the door, slamming it behind me and throwing the bolt. My breath came in heaving gasps, and I slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor. I was safe, for the moment. The cabin was empty, just a single room with a bed, a table, and a small stove. The walls were covered in old, faded pictures, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. I stumbled to the window, peering out into the darkness. It was out there, circling the cabin, its eyes catching the light from the window. It was looking for a way in. I watched as it moved, its body low to the ground, its muscles rippling under the fur. I didn't know what it was, didn't care to find out. All I knew was that it wanted me, and it wasn't going to stop until it got in. I searched the cabin for something, anything I could use to defend myself. There was a rusty axe by the door, and I grabbed it, holding it tight in my hands. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner, the axe in my lap, my eyes fixed on the door. I could hear it moving outside, scratching at the walls, testing the windows. It was patient, too patient, like it knew I couldn't stay in here forever. Dawn came slowly, the first light filtering through the trees, and with it the sounds outside stopped. I waited, listening, but there was nothing, just the wind in the trees and the distant call of a bird. I dared to open the door, stepping out into the cool morning air. The ground around the cabin was torn up, the grass flattened where it had prowled, but it was gone, at least for now. I didn't waste any time. I found the trail again and started walking, faster this time, not stopping until I reached my car, parked at the trailhead miles away. I didn't look back, didn't want to see if it was watching me leave. When I got home, I locked the door, pulled the shades, and sat down at the kitchen table. I still had the axe, the blade nicked and dull, but it was proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining things. The authorities believed me when I told them about the creature. Maybe it was because of the terror in my voice or the scratches on the cabin walls, but they believed me. They're out there now searching the woods, but I don't think they'll find it. Things like that, they're too smart to get caught. As for me, I won't be going back to the Allegheny anytime soon. I've had enough of the woods to last a lifetime. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear it. The soft rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig. And I wonder, did I really escape? Or is it out there, waiting, patient as ever, for me to let my guard down? I had gone into those woods looking for solitude, for a chance to escape my problems. Instead, I found something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Something that made me realize that sometimes the monsters we create in our minds are nothing compared to the ones that lurk in the shadows of the real world. And as I sit here writing this down, I can't help but wonder, if I had been more open, more willing to face my problems head on instead of running from them, would things have been different? Would I have ever encountered that thing in the woods? I'll never know. But one thing's for certain, I'll never take the people in my life for granted again. Because out there, in the depths of the Allegheny National Forest, I learned that sometimes being alone is far worse than any relationship problem could ever be. I never liked the solitude of the wild, but it's the only place that makes sense to me. I guess that's why I've spent the last few years working as a park ranger. It's a job that keeps me moving, gives me a purpose, and most importantly, keeps me far away from the mistakes of my past. My name's Randall Harkin, but folks around here just call me Randy. You can tell a lot about a person by the nickname they're given. Randall sounds like someone with ambition, but Randy? Randy's just here to get by. The Pine Hollow National Preserve isn't the kind of place you find on postcards. It's a sprawling mass of dense forest and rugged terrain, tucked away in a forgotten corner of Maine. The trees here are old, their trunks thick with the kind of moss that feels like it's been around since the dawn of time. The trails are barely marked, and the only sounds are the whispers of the wind and the occasional call of some unseen creature. It's the kind of place that could swallow you whole, and no one would notice you were gone. I'm not the only one who feels that way. I've seen hikers come through with wide eyes, their steps hesitant as if they're intruding on something ancient and unforgiving. I always tell them the same thing. Stick to the marked paths, keep your wits about you, and don't wander off. Most of them listen, but every now and then someone gets it in their head that they can handle more than they can. Those are the ones we end up searching for. My day usually starts before dawn. I wake up in my small cabin on the edge of the preserve, brew a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and head out to start my rounds. The early morning mist clings to the trees, creating an eerie landscape that never fails to send a shiver down my spine. but I've learned to push that feeling aside. Fear has no place in these woods, not if you want to survive. As I trek through the familiar paths, I keep my eyes peeled for any signs of trouble. Fallen trees, animal tracks that seem out of place, or any evidence of human activity where there shouldn't be. It's a lonely job, but I've grown accustomed to the solitude. Sometimes I even find comfort in it. But lately something's been off. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's a tension in the air, like the forest is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I've been a ranger long enough to know that when the woods go quiet, it's time to pay attention. Yesterday started like any other day. I was doing my rounds, checking the usual spots for any signs of trouble. The weather had been unpredictable lately, storms rolling in and out without warning. It was during one of these downpours that I found something strange near the north boundary. A tree had fallen, its roots torn from the ground like some giant had reached down and yanked it up. But it wasn't the tree that caught my attention. It was the blood smeared across its trunk, dark and sticky, glistening even in the rain. I am not squeamish. I've seen my fair share of animal attacks and unfortunate accidents, but this was different. The blood wasn't just on the tree. It was splattered across the ground, trailing off into the woods. Something had been dragged. That much was clear. I followed the trail for about 50 yards before I lost it in the underbrush. The whole thing set me on edge. Years of experience told me this wasn't a normal animal attack. The amount of blood, the way it was spread, it spoke of violence beyond what you'd typically see in nature. As I stood there, rain pelting my face, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself gripping my flashlight a little tighter. I swept the beam around, but the dense foliage revealed nothing. I've never been one for ghost stories or tall tales, but in that moment, all the legends I'd heard about these woods came flooding back. Stories of hikers going missing, of strange noises in the night, of things that shouldn't exist. I'd always dismissed them as campfire tales, but standing there in the rain, surrounded by the oppressive silence of the forest, I wasn't so sure anymore. I knew I should radio it in, get backup, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the fear of being labeled as the ranger who cried wolf. Whatever it was, I decided to head back to the station and gather my thoughts before making a report. On the way, I ran into Jonah, one of the newer rangers. He's a good kid, eager to prove himself, but there's something about him that reminds me of a dog chasing cars. So much energy, not enough sense to know when to stop. "Randy, you see anything weird out there?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of excitement. "Just the usual," I replied, not wanting to spook him. "A tree down in the north, probably a bear or something got into it." "A bear? This close to the trails?" Jonah's eyes lit up. "Think we should go check it out?" "Already did. Nothing to see." I gave him a look that I hoped conveyed the message, "Drop it." Jonah hesitated, then nodded, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. He muttered something about checking the south perimeter and took off, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the blood I'd seen wasn't just from some animal fight. I should have gone with Jonah, but I figured I'd catch up with him later. For now, I needed to process what I'd seen and decide on my next move. Back at the station, I tried to focus on my paperwork, but my mind kept drifting back to the north boundary. The image of that blood-smeared tree trunk was burned into my memory, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't rationalize it away. As the day wore on, my unease grew. I found myself jumping at every little sound, my eyes constantly darting to the windows, half expecting to see something lurking just beyond the glass. It was ridiculous, I knew that. I was a seasoned ranger, not some green rookie spooked by his own shadow. But still, the feeling persisted. By the time evening rolled around, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to head out again, this time with a rifle slung over my shoulder. It wasn't standard procedure, but something in my gut told me I might need it. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and humid. The forest felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As I made my way back to the fallen tree, the fading light cast long shadows that seemed to reach out like grasping fingers. I made it to the site just as the last light of day was slipping away. The blood was still there, darker now, almost black in the fading light. I crouched down, examining the ground where the trail had vanished earlier. There, barely visible under the leaves and muck, was something shiny. My heart raced as I reached out and pulled it free, a small silver bracelet, the kind a child might wear. My stomach turned as the implications hit me. This wasn't just some animal attack. This was something much, much worse. "Jonah, you out here?" I called, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. No answer, just the wind rustling through the trees. I should have turned back right then, should have radioed for backup and waited for help. But I couldn't. There was something in those woods, something that didn't belong, and I had to know what it was. With a deep breath, I steeled myself and plunged deeper into the forest, following the faint trail of disturbed earth and broken branches. The deeper I went, the more the forest changed. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out what little light remained. The ground beneath my feet felt wrong, softer, like walking on the surface of a swamp. And then I smelled it, a stench so foul it made my eyes water, a mix of rot and decay that seemed to cling to the air. I gripped my rifle tighter, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, half hidden behind a cluster of ferns, something pale and motionless. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The thing was the size of a man, but it was all wrong. Its limbs were twisted and contorted, covered in patches of matted fur. Its face was like something out of a nightmare, a grotesque blend of human and animal features, with a mouthful of teeth that didn't seem to fit. It reminded me of a wolf, but the proportions were all wrong. Its body was too long, its arms too short. It was like someone had tried to build a creature from memory and failed horribly. It wasn't dead, but it wasn't fully alive either. Its chest moved in shallow, ragged breaths, and its eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. I couldn't tell if it was in pain, or if it even knew I was there. But the worst part was the smell. It was coming from the creature, seeping out of its every pore. I took a step back, trying to decide what to do. My mind was racing. Should I shoot it, try to capture it? But before I could make a decision, the creature moved. It let out a sound, not a growl or a roar, but something low and guttural, like it was choking on its own breath. The sound cut through me, freezing me in place. The creature's head turned slowly, its eyes locking onto mine. I don't know how, but I knew it was looking at me, seeing me, understanding me. And then it moved again, faster this time, dragging itself across the ground with jerky, unnatural movements. I fired without thinking, the rifle kicking back against my shoulder. The shot hit the creature square in the chest, but it didn't stop. It kept coming, clawing its way closer. I fired again and again until the gun clicked empty. The creature finally collapsed, its body twitching once before going still. I stood there, staring at the lifeless thing in front of me, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever encountered, and the way it had moved, the way it had looked at me. I knew this wasn't something natural. Whatever it was, it didn't belong here. I don't remember how long I stood there, but eventually I forced myself to move. I had to get back to the station, had to report what I'd found. But when I turned to leave, I heard something, a faint rustling like leaves brushing against each other. I whipped around, my eyes scanning the shadows, but there was nothing there. The forest was empty, silent, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was overwhelming. I ran back to the station, my heart pounding, panicked gasps escaping my lips. By the time I reached the door, I was drenched in sweat, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. I burst inside, ready to grab the radio, but stopped dead in my tracks. Jonah was there, sitting at the desk, his face pale and drawn. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear. "Randy, what the hell did you find out there?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer him right away. I couldn't. My mind was still racing, trying to process what had happened. But as I looked at Jonah, I realized something. He wasn't surprised. He was scared, sure, but he wasn't surprised. "You knew," I said, my voice hoarse. "You knew something was out there, didn't you?" Jonah swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I didn't know for sure," he muttered, "but I've heard stories about things in these woods, things that shouldn't exist." He told me then about the rumors that had circulated among the rangers for years, stories of strange creatures, of hikers who'd gone missing, of things lurking in the shadows. I dismissed those stories as campfire tales, the kind of thing you tell to scare the newbies. But now, after what I'd seen, I wasn't so sure. We went back to the site the next morning, Jonah and I, along with a couple of the other rangers. The creature's body was still there, lying in the same spot where I'd left it. The smell had gotten worse, so bad that it was hard to breathe. We didn't touch it, didn't move it. We just stood there, staring down at the thing that shouldn't have existed. In the end, we did what we had to do. We reported it, got the higher-ups involved. They sent in a team to take care of it, to clean up the mess. They didn't give us any explanations, just told us to keep quiet, to act like nothing had happened. But something did happen, something that changed the way I see this place, the way I see the world. I don't know what that creature was, and I don't think I ever will. But I do know one thing. Pine Hollow isn't just another patch of forest. It's something else, something ancient and dangerous, and I'm not sure I want to be here anymore. As I packed up my things that evening, ready to head home, Jonah stopped me. "Randy," he said, his voice low, "whatever you do, don't go back out there alone. There's more of them. I know there is." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wasn't planning on going back. Not now, not ever. But as I drove away from Pine Hollow, watching the trees recede in my rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that whatever was out there in those woods was watching, waiting, and someday it would come for us all. In the days that followed, an uneasy quiet settled over Pine Hollow. The higher-ups had come and gone, taking the creature's body with them, and leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. We were told to carry on as usual, to treat the incident as nothing more than an anomaly. But how do you go back to normal after something like that? I tried to fall back into my routine, but everything felt different now. The forest, once a place of solitude and purpose, now seemed to hide secrets in every shadow. Each snapping twig, each rustle of leaves, sent my heart racing. I found myself jumping at the slightest sound, my hand always hovering near my sidearm. About a week after the incident, I was approached by a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Laura Simmons, a biologist from the State University. She claimed to be conducting research on local wildlife, but there was something in her eyes, a keen interest that went beyond academic curiosity. "I heard there was some unusual activity in the area recently," she said, her voice casual but her gaze intense. "Anything you can tell me about that, Ranger Harkin?" I hesitated, remembering the strict orders we'd been given to keep quiet. But something about Dr. Simmons made me want to trust her. Maybe it was the way she looked at the forest, with a mix of wonder and wariness that mirrored my own feelings. "Nothing official," I replied carefully. "But off the record, I've seen things in these woods that I can't explain, things that shouldn't exist." Dr. Simmons nodded, unsurprised. "I've heard similar stories from other areas," she said. "Sightings of creatures that defy classification, unexplained disappearances. There's a pattern here, Ranger Harkin, and I intend to find out what's behind it." Over the next few weeks, Dr. Simmons became a regular presence in Pine Hollow. She set up camera traps, collected soil samples, and interviewed locals about their experiences in the forest. I found myself spending more and more time with her, sharing my knowledge of the area and the strange occurrences I'd witnessed. As we worked together, I began to see the forest through new eyes. Dr. Simmons pointed out anomalies I'd never noticed before, patches of vegetation that seemed to grow in unnatural patterns, areas where the wildlife fell eerily silent. It was like peeling back a veil, revealing a hidden world that had always been there, just beyond my perception. But our investigation didn't go unnoticed. I started to feel eyes on me whenever I was in the forest, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck that told me I was being watched. And it wasn't just me. Other rangers reported similar experiences, strange noises in the night, glimpses of shadowy figures that vanished when approached, and an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to permeate certain areas of the preserve. One evening, as Dr. Simmons and I were reviewing footage from one of her camera traps, we saw something that made my blood run cold. It was just a flash, barely a second of video, but it was unmistakable. A pair of glowing eyes in the darkness, too high off the ground to belong to any known animal in the area. and behind those eyes a vague outline of something massive and misshapen. "We need to go public with this," Dr. Simmons said, her voice trembling slightly. "People need to know what's happening here." I shook my head. "They'll never believe us, and even if they did, think about the panic it would cause. We need more evidence." But as the words left my mouth, I realized I was afraid, not just of what might be lurking in the woods, but of what would happen if the truth came out. Would Pine Hollow become a circus, overrun with thrill seekers and monster hunters? Or worse, would it be shut down entirely, sealed off from the world? As we debated our next move, a knock at the door made us both jump. It was Jonah, his face pale and drawn. "You need to see this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jonah led us to a secluded area of the preserve, a place I'd rarely visited due to its rough terrain and dense vegetation. As we pushed through the undergrowth, the air grew thick and oppressive, carrying a faint but unmistakable odor of decay. "I found it yesterday," Jonah explained as we walked. "I didn't want to believe it at first, thought maybe I was imagining things. But it's real. God help us, it's real." We emerged into a small clearing, and I felt my heart stop. There, in the center of the space, was a massive depression in the ground, easily 20 feet across. But it wasn't a sinkhole or any natural formation. The edges were too smooth, too regular. It looked like a footprint, Dr. Simmons breathed, completing my thought. "My God, it's a footprint." As we stood there trying to process what we were seeing, a low rumble echoed through the forest. It wasn't thunder. The sky was clear. This sound came from the earth itself, a deep primordial growl that seemed to vibrate in our bones. "We need to leave," I said, my ranger training kicking in despite my fear. "Now." We turned to go but stopped short. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure humanoid, but wrong in a way that defied description. Its proportions were off, its skin a patchwork of fur and scales, and its eyes were filled with an intelligence that was anything but animal. For a moment we all stood frozen, locked in a silent standoff. Then, with a speed that belied its size, the creature lunged forward. What happened next was a blur of motion and terror. I pushed Dr. Simmons behind me, fumbling for my sidearm as Jonah let out a strangled yell. The creature moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in the blink of an eye. I managed to get off 2 shots, the sound of gunfire deafening in the enclosed space. But if the bullets hit, they had no effect. The creature barreled into me, knocking me off my feet and sending me sprawling. As I hit the ground, I caught a glimpse of Jonah grappling with the thing, his face a mask of determination and fear. Dr. Simmons was shouting something, but her words were drowned out by a bone-chilling roar from the creature. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to help Jonah, but what I saw next stopped me in my tracks. The creature had Jonah in its grasp, but instead of attacking, it seemed to be changing. Its form was shifting, melting and reforming like something out of a nightmare. And then, in a moment of horror that will stay with me for the rest of my days, I realized what was happening. The creature wasn't just killing Jonah. It was absorbing him, assimilating him into its own grotesque form. I heard Dr. Simmons scream, and the sound snapped me back to reality. I grabbed her arm and ran, dragging her with me as we plunged back into the forest. Behind us, the sounds of Jonah's struggle faded, replaced by that same low, earth-shaking rumble we'd heard before. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing at the base of a massive oak tree. As we sat there, gasping for breath, the full weight of what we'd seen came crashing down on us. What was that thing?" Dr. Simmons asked between ragged breaths. I shook my head, unable to find words to describe the horror we'd witnessed. "I don't know," I finally managed, "but I think it's been here all along, waiting, watching, and now it's awake," she finished, her voice barely a whisper. The next few days passed in a haze of fear and frantic activity. We reported Jonah as missing, but deep down we knew the truth. He wasn't missing. He was gone, consumed by something beyond our understanding. Dr. Simmons and I threw ourselves into our research, combing through historical records, local legends, anything that might give us a clue about what we were dealing with. What we found chilled us to the bone. Stories of disappearances in the area stretched back centuries. Native American legends spoke of a sleeping giant beneath the earth, a being that would awaken to consume the world. Early settlers had tales of strange lights in the woods, of people who went into the forest and came back, changed. "It's been here all along," Dr. Simmons said one night, her eyes wild with a mix of fear and excitement. "Don't you see? It's not just a creature, it's evolving, adapting. The thing we saw, the one that took Jonah, I think it was just a small part of something much, much bigger." I wanted to dismiss her theory, to cling to some shred of rational explanation, but deep down I knew she was right. The forest itself was alive, aware in some vast, incomprehensible way, and we had awakened it. As if to confirm our worst fears, reports started coming in from all over the preserve. Hikers glimpsing impossible creatures, rangers finding twisted hybrid animals that defied classification, and always that sense of being watched, of some vast intelligence turning its attention towards us. We knew we had to act, to warn people, to try and stop whatever was happening. But how do you fight something that can reshape reality itself? How do you warn the world about a threat that most people would dismiss as fantasy? In the end, we did the only thing we could. We went public, releasing all our findings, all our evidence to the media. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Pine Hollow became the center of a media frenzy, with reporters, researchers, and curiosity seekers descending on the preserve in droves. For a while, it seemed like our warning had been heeded. The preserve was closed to the public, and a joint task force of military and scientific personnel was brought in to investigate. Dr. Simmons and I found ourselves at the center of it all, trying to guide the investigation while grappling with our own trauma and fear. But as the days turned to weeks, a sense of complacency began to set in. Despite all our warnings, despite the evidence we'd gathered, many of the newcomers seemed to view the whole thing as some sort of elaborate hoax or mass hysteria. "You don't understand," I tried to explain to the task force leader, a gruff military type who clearly thought we were overreacting. "This thing, whatever it is, it's smart. It's waiting, watching, learning." He just shook his head, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. "We've been over every inch of this place, Ranger Harkin. If there was something out there, we'd have found it by now." But I knew better. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the air seemed to thicken with each passing day. The entity wasn't gone. It was preparing. And then, on a night when the moon hung low and red in the sky, it made its move. It started with a tremor, a subtle shaking of the earth that quickly grew into a full-blown quake. Trees toppled like dominoes, the ground split open in jagged cracks, and from those cracks emerged something. Tendrils of living matter, neither plant nor animal, burst from the earth. They writhed and twisted, reshaping themselves even as we watched. And everywhere they touched, the world began to change. Plants mutated, growing to monstrous sizes and impossible shapes. Animals fled in terror, only to be caught and absorbed, transformed into hybrid abominations. And the people. God, the people. I saw a researcher reach out to touch one of the tendrils, fascination overriding his caution. The moment his skin made contact, he began to change. His body warped and shifted, new limbs sprouting as others withered away. And his eyes filled with that same alien intelligence I'd seen in the creature that took Jonah. In the chaos that followed, I lost track of Dr. Simmons. The last I saw of her, she was running towards the heart of the disturbance, her face set in a mask of determination. I wanted to follow, to help her, but the ground beneath my feet had turned treacherous, writhing and shifting like a living thing. I ran, my ranger training warring with blind panic as I navigated the changing landscape. All around me, Pine Hollow was transforming, becoming something alien and terrifying. The entity we'd awakened wasn't just a creature or even a collection of creatures. It was remaking the world in its own image, turning our reality into something beyond human comprehension. As I reached the edge of the preserve, I turned back for one last look. The forest I'd known, the place that had been my home and my purpose for so long, was gone. In its place was a twisted, pulsating landscape of impossible colors and shapes, and rising above it all, a massive form that defied description, part flesh, part forest, all wrong. I knew then that this was just the beginning. Whatever had awakened in Pine Hollow wouldn't stop here. It would spread, consuming and transforming everything in its path, and we, in our ignorance and arrogance, had set it free. As I turned away, fleeing towards what I hoped was safety, a single thought echoed in my mind. What have we done? What have we unleashed upon the world? The morning started like any other at the ranger station. A cup of bitter coffee, a quick check of the weather report, and the familiar routine of strapping on my gear. The weight of the radio and rifle had become as natural as wearing clothes after 12 years on the job. The coffee maker gurgled its last drops as I reviewed yesterday's incident reports, mostly routine stuff, campers leaving food out, a couple of lost hikers who'd wandered off marked trails. But there was one report that made my stomach turn. A backpack had been found near Eagle Creek, torn to shreds, its contents scattered across a quarter-mile of forest. It matched the description of gear belonging to one of our missing persons, a hiker named Gerard. That made 5 disappearances in 6 weeks. The forest stretched out before me as I left the station, a vast sea of green beneath the morning mist. Most folks thought being a ranger meant peaceful days communing with nature. They didn't see the dark side, the accidents, the deaths, the ways the wilderness could swallow people whole without leaving a trace. I'd taken this job after 15 years pushing papers at an insurance firm in Chicago. Thought it would be my escape from the rat race, a chance to live simply. Some days it was exactly that. But lately, something had changed in these woods. You could feel it in the air, see it in the way the animals behaved. The trail to Eagle Creek was well maintained, popular with day hikers and amateur photographers. But as I pushed deeper into the forest, following the coordinates from yesterday's report, the path grew wilder. Branches reached across the trail like grasping fingers, and the underbrush seemed to thicken with every step. The remains of the backpack were exactly where the report had indicated. I crouched down to examine them, noting the unusual tear patterns. These weren't the typical signs of a bear attack. The fabric hadn't been clawed or bitten. It looked almost pulled apart, as if something with opposing thumbs had deliberately shredded it. A twig snapped somewhere behind me. I spun around, hand instinctively moving to my rifle. Nothing but trees and shadows. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and years of experience had taught me to trust that feeling. The radio at my hip crackled to life, making me jump. "Base to Wentworth, come in." The voice was distorted by static, but recognizable as Mike, the morning dispatcher. "Wentworth here, go ahead." "Got another report you need to check out. Campers up by Still Valley reported strange noises last night. Said it sounded like screaming." My blood ran cold. Still Valley. The old-timers spoke about that place in whispers, if they spoke of it at all. It lay in a dead zone, unmarked on any official maps. A place where even the most experienced rangers hesitated to go. "Copy that, I'll head up there now." The path to Still Valley wasn't really a path at all, more of a game trail that twisted through the densest part of the forest. As I climbed higher, the vegetation changed. The healthy pines and oaks gave way to twisted, sickly-looking trees. Their bark was black and scored with deep gouges, as if something massive had been sharpening its claws on them. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. No birds sang here, no squirrels darted between branches. Even the wind seemed to die, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like a physical presence. I checked my satellite phone. No signal. The radio was equally useless, producing nothing but static. I was on my own up here, just like every other ranger who'd investigated Strange Valley over the years. Some had come back with stories that ended their careers. Others hadn't come back at all. The valley opened up before me like a wound in the earth. From my vantage point on the ridge, I could see why the old-timers called it still. Nothing moved down there. The trees stood like petrified sentinels, their branches reaching toward a sky that seemed darker than it should be at midday. I took out my binoculars and scanned the area. Something caught my eye near the center of the valley, a collection of dark shapes that didn't match the natural landscape. My heart rate picked up as I adjusted the focus. They were tents, 3 of them, or what remained of them. They lay in tatters, equipment scattered across the ground like someone or something had torn through the campsite in a frenzy. The responsible thing would have been to call for backup, but with no radio signal and no sat phone connection, I had to make a choice: retreat to call for help and risk losing valuable time, or investigate while the trail was fresh. 20 years of experience told me to wait for backup, but 5 missing persons weighed heavily on my conscience. I began my descent into the valley, each step deliberate and silent. Years of tracking had taught me how to move through the woods without making a sound. The air grew colder as I descended, despite the summer heat. My breath came out in visible puffs like it would on a winter morning. The campsite was worse up close. The tents hadn't just been torn, they'd been shredded with methodical precision. Sleeping bags lay gutted, their stuffing spread across the ground like snow. A camping stove had been crushed, not dented or dropped, but literally compressed as if squeezed by an enormous hand. But it was the ground that made my blood run cold. The soil around the campsite was disturbed in a pattern I'd never seen before. Not from bears, not from mountain lions, not from any predator I'd encountered in my years of service. The tracks, if you could call them that, were massive, with impressions that suggested something walking on 2 legs, but the spacing and depth were all wrong. I found the first body near the tree line. It was partially hidden under a fallen log, and if I hadn't been looking carefully, I might have missed it. It was a deer, or what was left of one. But the way it had been handled was unlike anything I'd seen. The bones hadn't been crushed or broken for marrow like a bear would do. They'd been carefully separated at the joints, laid out in a deliberate pattern that made my skin crawl. A sound echoed through the valley, not quite a growl, not quite a roar, but something in between. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I brought my rifle up, scanning the trees, my finger resting lightly on the trigger. Movement caught my eye. About 50 yards away, something shifted in the shadows. It was big, much bigger than a bear, its shape somehow wrong in ways my mind couldn't quite process. As I watched, it moved again, and this time I got a clear look at it. The thing stood upright, easily 9 feet tall. Its body was a patchwork of fur and scales with limbs that bent at impossible angles. But it was the face that froze me in place, a face that seemed to be constantly shifting, as if it couldn't decide on a single form. One moment it looked almost bear-like, the next more like a wolf, but always with an underlying wrongness that defied description. Our eyes met across the clearing. Its gaze was intelligent, calculating, and deeply, terribly human. In that moment I understood why no one had survived to describe what lived in Still Valley. This wasn't just a predator, it was something that understood its prey, that took pleasure in the hunt. The creature moved with impossible speed. One moment it was across the clearing, the next it was nearly on top of me. I fired, the shot echoing through the valley. The bullet hit, I was sure of it, but the thing didn't even flinch. It just kept coming. I ran. There's no shame in admitting it. Training, experience, weapons, none of it mattered in the face of something that shouldn't exist. The forest was a blur as I sprinted between trees, branches whipping at my face. Behind me I could hear it moving, not running but flowing through the woods with a grace that defied its size. My lungs burned as I pushed harder, faster. The ridge where I'd entered the valley was ahead, but I knew I'd never make it up that slope with that thing behind me. I needed another plan. Ahead, I spotted a narrow gap between 2 massive boulders. It was tight, but I might be able to squeeze through. Something that big would have to go around. I dove for the gap, feeling the rough stone tear at my clothes and skin. Behind me, the creature slammed into the rocks with enough force to shake the ground. The impact bought me precious seconds. I scrambled through the other side and ran again, not daring to look back. The sound that followed me wasn't a roar or a howl. It was more like the creaking of massive trees in a storm, mixed with something that might have been laughter. The thing was playing with me, I realized. It could have caught me already if it wanted to. I reached for my radio again out of desperate habit, and this time, through some miracle, it crackled to life. "Base, this is Wentworth," I gasped as I ran. "Need immediate backup. Still Valley." Static answered me, but then through the white noise. "Copy. Location. Backup." The creature's next rush caught me off guard. I felt rather than saw it coming, diving to the side just as massive claws raked through the air where I'd been. The movement sent me tumbling down a steep incline, my rifle flying from my grasp. I hit the bottom hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Looking up, I saw the thing perched at the top of the slope. It moved like liquid shadow, its form seeming to shift and flow. But now there was something different about it, purpose rather than play. The hunt was ending. My hand found something in the leaves, an old piece of pipe, probably from some long-abandoned logging operation. Not much of a weapon against something like that, but better than nothing. I pushed myself to my feet, gripping the pipe tightly. The creature descended the slope with deliberate slowness, savoring the moment. In the filtered sunlight, I could see details I wished I hadn't, the way its flesh seemed to ripple and change, the hundreds of scars that covered its body, the too human intelligence in its eyes. "Come on then," I whispered, raising the pipe. If this was it, I'd go down fighting. The thing tensed, preparing to spring, but then something changed. Its head snapped up, nostrils flaring. A new sound was echoing through the valley helicopter rotors. The backup I'd called for was actually coming. The creature's form seemed to waver, like heat rising from hot pavement. For a moment it looked almost transparent. Then, with a sound like wind through dead trees, it turned and melted into the forest, leaving behind only broken branches and disturbed earth. I stayed where I was, pipe still raised, until the helicopter was directly overhead. Only then did my legs give out, and I sank to the ground, shaking. Within minutes, the valley was swarming with other rangers and emergency personnel. They found the campsite just as I'd left it. They found tracks too, but not like the ones I'd seen. These were bear tracks, perfectly ordinary except for their size. The official report would blame the disappearances on an exceptionally large bear, probably driven to aggression by territory encroachment or food scarcity. A rational, logical explanation. But I know what I saw. In the years since, I've studied every historical record, every local legend I could find. Stories of Strange Valley go back centuries. Native American tribes avoided it. Early settlers told tales of people vanishing, of things seen through the trees that couldn't be explained. I still work as a ranger, but I never go near Still Valley anymore. Let others patrol that area, others who haven't seen what lives there. Sometimes on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, I think I can hear it. That sound like creaking trees and laughter, echoing from the dark heart of the forest. The official maps still don't show Still Valley. The incidents have been filed away, explained or ignored. Life in the park goes on, but every now and then someone else disappears. Every now and then we find another campsite torn apart with surgical precision, and I know it's still out there waiting in the shadows between the trees, watching with those too human eyes. They say time heals all wounds, but some experiences leave scars that never fade. I've made my peace with what happened, more or less, but I'll never forget the day I learned that some parts of the wilderness don't belong to us, that there are places where the natural world gives way to something older, something that defies our attempts to categorize and understand it. And if you ever find yourself in these woods and the silence grows too deep, if you feel eyes watching you from the shadows, don't try to be a hero. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because in Still Valley the monsters aren't just real. They're waiting for you to make that one fatal mistake, to let your guard down for just a moment. And by then, it's already too late. The fluorescent lights of the office buzzed faintly overhead as I finished up my work for the day. It was Friday, and the clock on my computer screen read 6:47 p.m. Most of my coworkers had already left, eager to start their weekends. I stretched, feeling the satisfying pop in my back after hours of hunching over my keyboard. As I was packing up my bag, my phone started vibrating insistently on the desk. I glanced at the screen, surprised to see Hank's name flashing. Hank and I had been best friends since college, but he usually texted rather than called. A twinge of concern flickered through me as I answered. "Hey Hank, what's up?" Instead of Hank's usual cheerful greeting, I was met with heavy breathing and the sound of rustling leaves. When he finally spoke, his voice was tense and slightly breathless. "Mike, thank God you picked up. I need your help. Something's happened." I frowned, my hand pausing as I was zipping up my laptop bag. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm at Buckner Forest Preserve, Hank replied, his words tumbling out in a rush. I came out for a hike after work to clear my head, you know. But I found something really messed up. I called the police, but they think I'm pulling some sick prank. They won't listen. My stomach tightened at the panic in his voice. Hank wasn't the type to get worked up over nothing. Slow down, I said, trying to keep my own voice calm. What did you find? There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of Hank's ragged breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. A body, Mike. I found a body, and Jesus, it's not like anything I've ever seen before. This wasn't an accident or an animal attack. Someone or something did this on purpose. A chill ran down my spine. Hank, are you sure? Maybe it's... I'm sure. He cut me off, his voice hardening. I know what I saw. Will you come out here, please? I don't know what to do, and I don't want to be alone out here. I glanced at my watch, then out the window at the fading daylight. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, that I should tell Hank to get out of there and meet me somewhere safe. But the fear in my friend's voice overrode my reservations. Okay, I said, already heading for the elevator. Text me your exact location. I'm on my way. As I drove toward Buckner Forest Preserve, my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Hank had stumbled upon a horrific crime scene, or maybe, I tried to reassure myself, this was all some kind of misunderstanding. Perhaps he'd found an animal carcass in the dim light, and his imagination had run wild. The preserve was about a 40-minute drive from my office in Chicago. As I left the city behind, the buildings gave way to suburbs, and then to stretches of farmland interspersed with patches of forest. The sun was setting, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks that seemed at odds with the growing sense of dread in my chest. I turned off the main highway onto a smaller road that wound through dense woods. The trees pressed close on either side, their branches reaching over the pavement like grasping fingers. As darkness fell, I flicked on my high beams, the bright light cutting through the gloom ahead. Finally, I spotted Hank's blue Subaru parked at a small trailhead pullout. I pulled in beside it, noticing with unease that his was the only other vehicle there. Grabbing my phone and a flashlight from the glove compartment, I stepped out into the chilly evening air. Hank? I called out, sweeping my flashlight beam across the tree line. Where are you? Over here. His voice came from somewhere to my left, farther down the trail. Follow the path. I'll flash my light so you can see me. I saw a beam of light flicker between the trees about 100 yards away. Taking a deep breath, I started down the narrow dirt trail, leaves crunching beneath my feet. The woods seemed to close in around me, the darkness beyond my flashlight beam almost palpable. Every rustle and snap made me jump, imagining eyes watching me from the shadows. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, I rounded a bend and saw Hank. He was standing near the base of a large oak tree, his own flashlight clutched tightly in his hand. As I approached, the beam of light illuminated his face, and I was struck by how pale and drawn he looked. Mike, he said, relief evident in his voice, thanks for coming. I'm sorry to drag you out here, but I didn't know what else to do. I clasped his shoulder, trying to offer some reassurance. It's okay, I'm here now. Tell me what's going on. Hank ran a shaky hand through his hair. I was just trying to clear my head after a rough day at work, you know? I've hiked out here plenty of times before, but I went off the main trail wanting to explore a bit. That's when I found it. He gestured vaguely deeper into the woods. It's about a quarter mile that way. I can show you, but are you sure you want to see it? It's pretty bad. I hesitated, a part of me wanting nothing more than to grab Hank and get the hell out of there. But I knew I couldn't leave without understanding what had shaken my friend so badly. Yeah, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Show me. Hank nodded grimly and started leading the way, his flashlight beam sweeping back and forth across the forest floor. We pushed through dense underbrush, the branches seeming to claw at our clothes. The air grew colder and damper as we moved deeper into the woods, and an oppressive silence settled around us, broken only by our labored breathing and the occasional snap of a twig beneath our feet. Finally, Hank came to a stop in a small clearing. There, he said quietly, pointing his flashlight beam toward the base of a gnarled old tree. I followed the light, my eyes struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. At first it looked like a tangle of roots and debris, but as I stepped closer, horror washed over me as I realized what I was looking at. It was a body, or what remained of one. The corpse was twisted and contorted in ways that defied human anatomy, limbs bent at impossible angles. But that wasn't the worst of it. The skin had been, I struggled to find the right word, shredded, peeled. It hung in ragged strips, exposing muscle and sinew beneath. Some of these strips had been woven into the branches of the nearby trees, as if in some grotesque attempt at camouflage. I stumbled backward, my stomach heaving. Jesus Christ, I gasped, fighting the urge to vomit. What could have done this? Hank shook his head, his face ashen. I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. That's why I called the police, but they wouldn't listen. They thought I was some kid pulling a prank. I forced myself to look at the body again, trying to approach it with some semblance of objectivity. Could it have been an animal attack? A bear, maybe? No way, Hank said firmly. Look at how the skin is woven into the trees. No animal does that. This was intentional. A chill ran down my spine as I realized he was right. Whatever had done this wasn't just killing for food or in self-defense. This was something else entirely. We need to call the police again, I said, pulling out my phone. But as I looked at the screen, my heart sank. No signal out here, damn it. Hank nodded grimly. Yeah, I had to hike back to my car to make the call earlier. That's part of why I wanted you to come. I didn't want to leave it unguarded, but I was scared to stay here alone. I understood his fear all too well. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats, and the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on us. Okay, I said, trying to think clearly despite the panic clawing at the edges of my mind. We need a plan. We can't just leave this here, but we also can't stay out in these woods all night. Hank opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a twig snapped loudly somewhere in the darkness behind us. We both whirled around, our flashlights cutting through the gloom, but revealing nothing but trees and shadows. Did you hear that? Hank whispered, his voice tight with fear. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. Yeah, it was probably just an animal, right? A deer or something? But even as I said it, I knew I was trying to convince myself as much as Hank. The forest suddenly seemed alive with menace, every rustle of leaves and creak of branches a potential threat. We should get out of here, Hank said, already backing away from the grotesque scene. Come back in the morning with the police. I was about to agree when something caught my eye. A flash of movement at the edge of my flashlight beam. I swung the light back, illuminating a patch of forest floor about 20 feet away. Wait, I said, grabbing Hank's arm. Look at this. In the soft earth, clearly visible in the harsh glare of our flashlights, was a footprint. But it wasn't like any animal track I'd ever seen. It was massive, easily twice the size of my own foot, with long, cruel-looking claw marks extending from each toe. Hank's breath caught in his throat. What the hell made that? Before I could answer, a low, rumbling growl echoed through the trees. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, not quite animal, not quite human, but filled with a primal, predatory malice that sent ice through my veins. Run, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Then, as the growl intensified, I shouted, Run! We took off through the woods, all thoughts of caution forgotten in our blind panic. Branches whipped at our faces and roots threatened to trip us with every step. But we pushed on, driven by pure adrenaline and fear. Behind us, I could hear something crashing through the underbrush. Whatever it was big, and it was fast. The sound of splintering wood and tearing foliage grew closer with each passing second. This way, Hank yelled, veering off to the right. I followed without question, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. We burst out of the tree line into a small clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and empty. Without a word, we both made for it, praying it would offer some kind of shelter. Hank reached the door first, yanking on the handle. For a heart-stopping moment, it refused to budge. Then, with a groan of protesting wood, it swung open. We tumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind us. Help me barricade it, I gasped, already shoving an old dusty couch against the door. Hank joined me, and together we piled whatever furniture we could find against the entrance. As we worked, the growling outside grew louder. Something heavy slammed against the side of the cabin, making the whole structure shudder. We froze, staring at each other in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. "What do we do now?" Hank whispered, his eyes wide with fear. I looked around the cabin, searching for anything we could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on an old fireplace poker leaning against the hearth. I grabbed it, feeling slightly less helpless with its solid weight in my hand. "We wait," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Whatever's out there, it can't get in here. We'll wait until morning, then make a run for it." Hank nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. We both knew that if the thing outside really wanted to get in, our makeshift barricade wouldn't hold it for long. As if in response to my thoughts, another impact rocked the cabin. This time I heard the distinct sound of wood splintering. A quick glance confirmed my fears. A large crack had appeared in one of the boarded-up windows. "We need a better plan," Hank said, his voice shaking. "We can't just sit here and wait to die." I nodded, my mind racing. Okay, let's think. There has to be something we can do." As we huddled in the darkened cabin, the sounds of our pursuer circling outside, I couldn't help but wonder how we had ended up in this nightmare. What was that thing out there? And more importantly, how were we going to survive the night? The old cabin creaked and groaned around us, its timbers protesting against the assault from outside. Hank and I huddled near the center of the single room, our eyes darting between the boarded-up windows and the barricaded door. Every few minutes a heavy impact would shake the structure, followed by that bone-chilling growl. "We need to find a way to contact someone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's got to be a landline or a radio or something in here." Hank nodded, his face pale in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the boards. "Good idea. You check that side. I'll look over here." We split up, searching the cabin as thoroughly as we could in the near darkness. I rummaged through drawers and cupboards, finding nothing but dust, cobwebs, and the occasional scurrying mouse. The cabin seemed to have been abandoned for years, its contents long since looted or decayed. "Anything?" I called out to Hank. "Nothing useful," he replied, frustration evident in his voice. "Wait, hold on, I think I found something." I made my way over to where Hank was crouched near an old desk. He held up a battered leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. "A journal?" I asked, peering over his shoulder. Hank nodded, carefully opening the fragile book. "Yeah, looks like it. Maybe it can tell us something about this place or what's out there." As Hank flipped through the pages, I kept an ear out for any changes in the sounds outside. The creature seemed to have settled into a pattern of circling the cabin, occasionally testing the walls for weakness. I tried not to think about how long our shelter would hold. "Listen to this," Hank said suddenly, his finger tracing a line of faded text. "It's dated about 30 years ago. The sightings are becoming more frequent. The loggers speak of a beast in the woods, something that walks like a man but hunts like no animal they've ever seen. I've tried to warn the Forest Service, but they won't listen. They think it's just superstition, or maybe a bear that's lost its fear of humans. But I know better. I've seen it." A chill ran down my spine. "Keep reading," I urged. Hank turned the page, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There's more." I finally got a clear look at the creature last night. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with matted fur covering its body. But its face, God help me, its face was almost human. Its eyes gleamed with an intelligence that no mere animal could possess. I know now that the old legends are true. The Wendigo walks these woods. "Wendigo?" I repeated, the unfamiliar word feeling strange on my tongue. "What the hell is that?" Before Hank could answer, a deafening crash echoed through the cabin. We both jumped, whirling to face the source of the noise. One of the boarded-up windows had given way, planks of wood clattering to the floor. In the gap, illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the trees, we caught our first clear glimpse of our pursuer. It was, as the journal had described, massive. Its body was a nightmarish fusion of human and animal features, with elongated limbs covered in matted dark fur. Its face was a twisted parody of human features, with sunken eyes that glowed with an eerie yellowish light. But what struck me most were its hands, not paws, but hands, ending in wickedly curved claws that looked capable of tearing through flesh and bone with ease. For a moment we all froze, Hank and I paralyzed with fear, the creature seemingly surprised by its sudden intrusion. Then, with a roar that shook dust from the rafters, it began to force its way through the opening. "The back door!" I yelled, grabbing Hank's arm and yanking him towards the rear of the cabin. We had cleared a path earlier during our search, and now we sprinted for our lives, the sound of splintering wood and inhuman snarls close behind us. We burst out into the cool night air, the forest looming dark and forbidding before us. There was no time to think, no time to plan. We simply ran, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs, driven by pure animal instinct to escape. I could hear the creature pursuing us, its heavy footfalls and occasional roars spurring us to even greater speed. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare slow down. Beside me, Hank was gasping for air, his face a mask of terror in the intermittent moonlight that filtered through the canopy. We broke through a thicket into a small clearing, and I skidded to a halt. Ahead of us, the ground dropped away sharply, a cliff face impossible to climb down in the dark. "This way," Hank yelled, veering to the left along the cliff's edge. I followed, my mind racing. We couldn't keep running forever. We needed a plan, a way to lose our pursuer or fight back. As if in answer to my desperate thoughts, I spotted a dark opening in the cliff face ahead, a cave. "There!" I shouted to Hank, pointing. Without hesitation, we made for the cave entrance. We ducked inside just as the creature burst into the clearing behind us. The cave was pitch black, and we pressed ourselves against the cool stone walls, trying to quiet our labored breathing. Outside, we could hear the Wendigo sniffing the air, its growls echoing off the cliff face. "What do we do now?" Hank whispered, his voice barely audible. I fumbled in my pocket, relieved to find my phone still there. The screen illuminated, casting a faint blue glow around us. No signal, of course, but at least we had some light. I switched on the flashlight function, careful to point it away from the cave entrance. The beam revealed a narrow passage leading deeper into the earth. Rough-hewn steps descended into darkness. "We can't stay here," I said, gesturing towards the passage. "It'll find us for sure. Maybe we can lose it in there." Hank nodded grimly, and we started down the steps, moving as quietly as we could. The sounds of the creature outside grew fainter as we descended, replaced by the drip of water and the echo of our footsteps. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the passage opened up into a larger cavern. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling, giving the unsettling impression that we were standing on the edge of an abyss. "Look," Hank said, pointing. On the far side of the cavern, barely visible in the gloom, was what looked like a man-made structure, a stone archway carved with intricate symbols. We approached cautiously. The symbols were like nothing I'd ever seen before, a mix of angular lines and curves that seemed to shift and move if I looked at them too long. "What is this place?" I wondered aloud. Hank ran his hand over the carved stone. "Some kind of old mining operation, maybe? Or," he hesitated, "something older." A low rumble from above made us both freeze. Dust and small pebbles rained down from the ceiling. The Wendigo had found the cave entrance. "We need to keep moving," I said urgently. Beyond the archway, the passage continued, sloping gently downward. We hurried through the arch, and I felt a strange tingling sensation as we passed under it, like static electricity dancing across my skin. Behind us, the rumbling grew louder, punctuated by the creature's roars. The passage twisted and turned, leading us deeper underground. We passed more carved symbols on the walls and occasionally glimpsed side chambers filled with strange, half-glimpsed shapes that I tried not to look at too closely. Finally, we emerged into another large cavern. This one was dimly lit by an eerie greenish glow emanating from pools of still water scattered around the chamber. In the center stood a raised stone dais, upon which rested a pedestal holding something. From this distance in the poor light, I couldn't make out what it was. "What the hell?" Hank muttered, voicing my own confusion. Before we could investigate further, a deafening roar echoed through the cavern. We spun around to see the Wendigo framed in the passage we had just exited, its eyes gleaming with malevolent hunger. "Run!" I yelled, though there was nowhere left to run to. We sprinted for the dais, hoping to put some obstacle between us and the creature. As we reached the pedestal, I finally got a clear look at what it held, a knife, its blade made of some dark stone that seemed to drink in what little light there was. Without thinking, driven by desperation, I grabbed it. The moment my hand closed around the hilt, a jolt of energy surged through me. The symbols carved into the blade began to glow with the same greenish light as the pools, and I felt a presence in my mind, ancient, alien, but undeniably powerful. The Wendigo charged, covering the distance between us with terrifying speed. But as it reached the edge of the dais, it suddenly recoiled, as if it had struck an invisible barrier. Knowledge flooded into my mind, snippets of an alien language, rituals performed in this very cavern millennia ago, the true nature of the creature we faced. I knew, somehow, that this knife was the key to defeating it. "Hank," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, "I need you to trust me when I tell you to push that thing off the dais." He looked at me like I was insane, but nodded. The Wendigo circled us, probing the invisible barrier, searching for weakness. I raised the knife, the words of a chant I had never learned spilling from my lips. The glow from the blade intensified, and I felt power building around us. The barrier flickered. "Now!" I shouted. As Hank shoved the creature back, I brought the knife down in a gleaming arc. It bit deep into the Wendigo's chest, and an unearthly howl filled the cavern. Green fire erupted from the wound, spreading rapidly across the creature's body. In moments it was over. Where the Wendigo had stood, there was nothing but a pile of ashes, quickly dissipating in a non-existent wind. Hank and I stood there, panting, trying to process what had just happened. The knife in my hand grew cold, the glow fading along with the alien presence in my mind. Is it over?" Hank asked hesitantly. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure. "I think so, but we need to get out of here, and we need to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." We made our way back through the tunnels, emerging into the pre-dawn light. As we hiked back towards our cars, exhausted and shell-shocked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled into something much bigger than we realized. The Wendigo was gone, but I had a sinking feeling that it was just the tip of a very large, very dangerous iceberg. One thing was certain, our lives would never be the same again. And somehow I knew this was just the beginning of a much larger story. In the weeks that followed our harrowing night in Buckner Forest, Hank and I tried to return to our normal lives. But the memory of what we had experienced and what we had learned haunted us. We made an anonymous tip to the police about the body we had found, but by the time they investigated, all traces of the gruesome scene had vanished. The official report chalked it up to a hoax or a case of overactive imaginations. I kept the stone knife hidden away, unable to bring myself to get rid of it but afraid of its power. Sometimes late at night I could swear I heard it whispering to me, hinting at other creatures lurking in the dark corners of the world, waiting to be unleashed. Hank threw himself into research, digging into old legends and folklore, trying to find any information he could about the Wendigo and other mythical beasts. He started a blog ostensibly about cryptozoology, but really a veiled attempt to warn others about what might be out there. As for me, I found myself unable to look at the forests around Chicago the same way. Every shadow held potential threats, every unexplained sound a possible harbinger of terror. But along with the fear came a sense of purpose. We had faced something inhuman and survived. We had protected others from a threat they never knew existed. And deep down I knew it wasn't over. The knife was proof that there were forces at work in the world far beyond our understanding. Forces that sometimes needed to be confronted by ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Whatever came next, whatever other horrors lurked in the darkness, I knew that Hank and I would face them together. We had been changed by our experience, forged into something new. We were no longer just two friends from Chicago. We were monster hunters, and our work was just beginning. My story takes place in the late 1990s in Port Huron, Michigan. My family and I had moved into a home that at the time wasn't even a century old. My bedroom was on the top floor of the home on the left side of a stairway, and my brother's room located opposite of me. In between both rooms was a doorway to an old storage room. During our first month there, the house seemed quiet. I was focused on settling into a new school and making what friends I could. It took a series of events to change everything for me. It all began one night with the sound of loud tapping on the outside of my door. It was always between the same times, between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. At first I attributed it to my brother. He tended to sneak around at times at night before, so I thought nothing of the noise at first, until several days had passed without an end to it. I finally decided to get up and go to his room to tell him to stop pulling pranks on me, that we both had to be up early for school. I would find his door to be shut each time and him fast asleep. I checked the rest of the house just to be sure it wasn't my parents, but each time I would find them to be asleep in their room downstairs. After another 2 weeks of this, I gave up and figured I would just go back to sleep each time. It never ended up actually staying that way, though. The noise continued for months, and at times when it happened, the entire room would get cold. This was the most confusing part, as summer nights in Michigan were always incredibly hot. By mid-July, it escalated, with a friend sleeping over one night and waking me up at 3 a.m. after hearing the same noise outside the door, only this time claiming that he saw a shadow moving in my room. I thought it was his imagination and told him as much, although the same noises would continue, and the sensation of cold as well. In early August it happened. I woke up again one night to the tapping noise, but this night felt different. I could feel a sensation of unease, and my room felt as if it was in the Arctic. I could even see my own breath as I sat up out of my bed in the dark, with my only light being that of a small nightlight across from my bed. I heard a voice from the door say, "Why are you here?" I froze in fear and looked towards my door to see a dimly lit figure standing there. I could make out a scraggly beard and what looked like the uniform of an old ship captain. I had only seen it in museums and books before, and now here was a figure wearing it in my room and staring at me no less, with dark holes where his eyes should have been. I heard the figure ask again, "Why are you here?" I couldn't move and watched as he seemed to hobble across the room, and noticing as he did that he seemed to be gliding in air and had what looked like fog where his legs should be. And as he passed by my bed, I noticed an odor, the kind that old wet clothing gives off. The figure stopped near my closet space and stood still. I blinked twice, not believing what I was seeing, and after blinking, he was gone, as if he had teleported out of the room. It took seconds before I leapt out of bed and ran downstairs screaming in terror about the man in my room and waking my mom up as I did. I refused to sleep in that room again until we moved 6 months later. Although my mom thought it was a nightmare at first, she would see the same figure multiple times in the house over the next 5 months, and almost always out of the corner of her eye. We didn't talk about it for years afterward, until while I was visiting home 13 years ago. This time I was actually involved with a paranormal investigation team, all of which was sparked by this experience. While going through a museum on the shipwrecks of the Great Lakes, I picked up a book on the Great Storm of 1913 and froze in place while looking through it. In it I saw a picture of the very same figure I had seen in my room, and the entry noted he had gone under in that same storm on his ship that he was the captain of, with no survivors ever found. I decided to do some digging and found through old property records that it was his house that I had lived in, and that my room was very likely his bedroom. To this day, I cannot think of any of these events without feeling unnerved and half expecting him to be standing in the room I am in, no matter where it is, with that same empty stare in his face.